Chapter 401. There was almost nothing intact in the hall. The Death Eaters had done most of the damage, and if Harry had recently realized that there was a huge skill gap between him and those wizards, he was now beginning to roughly grasp its size. They didn't just play with him and his squad, they didn't even raise a wand against them, you might say. Suddenly the stones, large and small, that had fallen from above onto Night's Fall, moved, and in a moment, as if they were made of foam, moved aside, showing everyone unharmed, but in a slightly torn coat, a living Max. I'd forgotten I'd be tougher under the strengthening, he said quietly, shaking the dust off his coat. None of the Death Eaters were taking any action, but Harry noticed a shadow creeping swiftly up from behind Max. Could it be one of them? Harry saw that Max noticed it, too, but he only smiled. How about a magic trick? No one answered him, waiting. Only the rustle and creak of stone chips under his feet sounded in the hall. I'm gonna make, Max pulled a second wand from his pocket, this wand disappear. This movement of his provoked a shadow that had crept up almost close to him to attack sharply, rushing at Max clearly faster than a human could do. It was the Death Eater, holding a long knife. With an incredibly quick movement, Max managed to parry the lunge from his back, and with lightning speed, he plunged a second wand into his enemy's eye. Ta-da-am! The Death Eater fell backwards to the floor, frozen with no sign of life, and the tip of the wand's hilt sticking out of his eye, at an angle, as if going into his neck. It didn't evaporate. Whoops! These words served as a trigger, and fast and powerful dark beams of spells flew toward Max, without further ado, but Max literally scattered in darkness, immediately settling to the floor. The spell beams exploded, burned, and reduced to ashes several cubic meters of stone where the blonde man had just been. In the next second, a black silhouette rose from the floor behind Crouch Jr. It swung an equally black sword upward from below, cutting the wizard apart, disappearing again, but growing under the guy's dome of protection. And now into a defensive position, said the black silhouette in Max's voice, immediately turning into the guy himself, who began to apply more and more protective charms with incredible speed, strengthening the dome of the Protego to absurd indicators. It was no longer just a grey translucent film interspersed with Hermione's charms. It was already a nearly opaque, luminous shield, and the multiple beams of spells began to beat helplessly against it. Wasting no time, Max began to examine the injured guys, waving a wand over them. No one dared to say anything, focusing on defense and preparing to restore something at any moment. As a result, the guys did not notice how white clumps of smoke burst into the hall, engaging in a fierce battle with the remnants of the Death Eaters. However, after a few seconds, the Death Eaters began to retreat. Where's Potter? Max asked the guys, and suddenly everyone looked at each other. What? Where did that bastard? Max quickly stepped out of the field of protection, removing it, and the guys, still in a state of shock, bristled at Moody and Tonks with their wands. Calm down, folks, Moody grinned. Where's Potter? He was here a moment ago, Hermione said, looking strangely in the direction Max was supposed to run off to. Where are the Death Eaters? Retreating, Tonks hurried over to the students, who suddenly began to settle to the floor, hiding their eyes exhaustedly. You all need to go to the hospital right away. Moody took something out of his pocket and began to say quickly but quietly that Potter had disappeared again. 402, Chapter 402. A/N, do you want to finish reading the book today? Do it. Now you can, Winky Face, may the magic be with you. Enjoy. 3. I ran as fast as I could down the corridors and stairs of the Ministry in near total darkness. My gut was telling me where Potter had gone, but much better than intuition, I could tell by the sheer volume of magic that literally exploded nearby. The saddest thing was that the force load almost drank me to the bottom. Tough creatures, those Death Eaters. It's very good that I killed Dollahoe first. He managed to give out more than a third of the total destruction and spells from the Death Eaters for the whole fight in a few seconds. An expert in his field. Bella also turned out to be good, though her attacks are very spot on, and a couple of times, she almost killed me. And now I'm dragging my feet, being not very sure of my sanity, hurrying after Potter. There's the atrium and disappointment. I wanted to see it. I really wanted to. In the middle of a dilapidated long hall, in which about half of the entire floor and walls covering remained, where the statues that stood on the fountain lie broken and fused in a completely different place, Potter was kneeling, banging his forehead on the floor and pounding it with his fists. Dumbledore was sitting on the floor with his back against the partition between the two fireplaces, bleeding and breathing heavily. A bald Voldemort in a black Jedi costume and a black cloak walked back and forth around this whole composition. As soon as I appeared in the hall, he immediately noticed me. Ah, Mr. Knight. He smiled broadly, and I tried to get away with shadows. As soon as I started forming them, Voldemort simply waved his hand, and I was pushed forward, rolling across the floor almost to Dumbledore's body, still alive. You should say goodbye to your beloved headmaster, Voldemort scoffed, pacing back and forth and spreading magic around him in huge volumes. Intentional or not, it didn't matter, but I could sense the meaning of such chimerism, as well as the benefits in terms of power. I'll even be so gracious that I won't interfere because I have something to discuss with Harry Potter, don't I? Voldemort abruptly appeared next to Potter. I just now realized how exhausted he really was, but at the same time, he didn't forget to keep us all in sight, bending over Potter and whispering something to him quietly. You will laugh, Mr. Knight, Dumbledore muttered, smiling sadly. His half-glasses were no longer on. But I slipped on my own robe at a crucial moment. I clearly felt in magic that the headmaster was no longer a fighter, but he had enough strength to try to get up, and I helped him in that endeavor. Voldemort was wary, but not much. He also seemed to understand the deplorable situation of Dumbledore, and he did not perceive me at all as an opponent. And you're not his opponent right now. You've put in a lot of powers. Voldemort is also not in the best condition right now, and you could compete with him, but it's unlikely that you will be able to overcome him, and you won't be able to use a sword in close combat. He just won't let you near him with the volume of magic. Chimera. Suddenly, the fireplaces began to blaze with green fire, and Voldemort erected a pillar of some kind of ash shield around himself and Potter. Wizards in a variety of clothes from civilians to Aurors poured out of fireplaces, and Fudge was at the head of this procession. When they saw the Dark Lord, everyone froze. I hate prophecies, I muttered, supporting the headmaster and apparently preventing him from falling. I understand you so well, he nodded. Voldemort circled around Potter for a few more seconds, saying something inaudible to us, and then he looked at the headmaster and me. You know what, old man, grinned Voldemort. I won't kill you now. I see that you've managed to pick up a deadly, unremovable curse somewhere. I can feel death slowly coursing through your veins. And I will leave you to die from it so that you can feel the full depth of your powerlessness against me, Lord Voldemort. Then he disappeared in a black whirlwind, leaving an unhappy and broken Potter. There was silence in the ruined atrium for some time. He's really back, muttered Fudge. Voldemort is back. Amazing foresight, the headmaster smiled sadly. It's time for us to go to the hospital, it seems to me. 403, Chapter 403. To the hospital wing of Hogwarts, the headmaster, the shocked Potter, and I left by the fireplace from the Ministry atrium. Strangely enough, Madame Pomfrey, who immediately came out to us, found only severe exhaustion in everyone, plus a minimal amount of various minor injuries. I was hurt, too, and mostly not from spells, but from becoming a projectile that ploughed the stone floor and the benches in the hall with the archway. Dumbledore easily managed to convince Madame Pomfrey that we didn't need any special treatment and that we needed to talk in his office urgently. Reluctantly, Madame Pomfrey let us go, reproaching us for our irresponsible attitude toward our health. What about the others? As if waking up for a moment from his depressed and broken state, Potter spoke. They will be brought by people from the Order, the headmaster replied soothingly as we walked through the corridors of the castle. And Sirius? What about Sirius? He's not allowed into Hogwarts. Sirius has someone to take care of him at headquarters as well. But... Potter wanted to be indignant but was immediately interrupted by just one serious look from the headmaster. If Sirius hadn't left headquarters and tried to constantly violate security regulations, nothing would have happened. Wouldn't it, Mr. Potter? He had nothing to answer, and we got to the headmaster's office in silence. The darkness of night had no power over the office, lit by the fire in the fireplace and the bright glare of the open cabinet with the Pensieve. Dumbledore reached the chair behind his desk and sat down, letting the emotion of physical relief show on his face for a second. But he didn't let himself relax for long, gesturing for us to sit in the chairs opposite and leaning on his left arm. Potter looked tired and exhausted, and the abrasions and various external injuries gave him the appearance of some ragamuffin from the street. You took the prophecy, didn't you, Mr. Potter? The headmaster asked, looking at the guy. Harry glanced at me briefly but decided that since the headmaster was asking about it in my presence, then it was okay. Yes, headmaster. When we ended up in the Hall of Prophecy, I noticed it almost immediately. Among many others. Yes, headmaster. As soon as I picked it up, the Death Eaters appeared immediately, dragging Sirius behind them. Barty Crouch, Jr., was clearly leading them. They demanded the prophecy in exchange for Sirius and his life. Why, headmaster? Couldn't they have taken it themselves? You see, Mr. Potter, the headmaster tried to sit up more comfortably but only achieved a slight pain, judging from his face. The prophecy records are arranged in such a way that only the one about whom the prophecy is about can take them. So, what happened to the prophecy? Voldemort took it. Harry clenched his fists. I can't figure out how I ended up there myself. You, Mr. Potter, Dumbledore managed, even in such a gloomy and not the most illuminated atmosphere, to flash the half-moon spectacles that he put on who knows when. You fell outright in the middle of our fight in the apparition funnel. Wait, what? I couldn't contain my surprise. Isn't the entire ministry protected from apparition? Absolutely, Mr. Knight, Dumbledore nodded. But I think I know the reason for this. May I ask? Perhaps, but first, I would like to ask Mr. Potter what forced him to apparate, and when did he acquire such curious skills? Harry didn't hesitate, no. He just stared at the headmaster's desk, trying to formulate his thoughts. The guys and I have been practicing different spells. At that moment, the flames in the fireplace lit up green, and the headmaster and I pulled out our wands almost simultaneously but made no other movements. Moody came out of the flames, tapping his staff on the floor and cheerfully moving towards the vacant chair next to us. Mordred knows what? He exclaimed, limping. As soon as Alastor sat down heavily in a chair, straightening his prosthetic leg, he immediately reached into his bosom, taking out a flask from there. The smell of alcohol immediately spread through the office. After taking a couple of sips and wiping his mouth with his sleeve, the old Auror looked at us. What are you staring at? We didn't catch anyone. Those bastards worked the getaway like never before. I wouldn't be surprised if Crouch was developing the operation. May the devils roast him in hell for eternity. Are you a believer? Asked Potter immediately. No, Harry, Alastor shook his head. But I fucking love the idea of such an afterlife for these creatures. Alastor, the headmaster looked reproachfully at Moody, but the latter only brushed him off. You were breaking the defenses, weren't you? Yeah, we were breaking while you and that rascal Fletcher, who is only good to get somewhere, were unraveling the blocking of fireplaces. We were just about past the defenses. Moody took another sip of his swill, putting the flask back, when the defenses suddenly collapsed. Well, we had one last push left. That's when it came down on our own ministerial defense. Just as I thought, the headmaster nodded. That's what broke the anti-apparition barrier. Then why didn't everyone apparate from there, and there, too? I couldn't understand the situation. And why didn't you do it yourself? I thought about it. Indeed, why didn't I apparate, although now I could accurately recall the changed magic? Well, my protection did not mean the isolation of those inside. Even I, when I took it off, first began to pass through the shields. I don't know. Somehow I got used to the idea that you can't apparate at Hogwarts and the Ministry. It's the same story here, the headmaster nodded. Back to Mr. Potter and his reasons for apparating. We're listening to you. 404, Chapter 404. A/N, do you want to finish reading the book today? Do it. Now you can, Winky Face, may the magic be with you. Enjoy. 3. Potter looked up, looking straight into the headmaster's eyes. I felt like I really needed to be in that place. I saw Voldemort torture members of the Order who came to help. Rookie. Ugh, spat, but only with a sound. Moody didn't even suggest that Voldemort himself put these thoughts into you. I have never been wrong when I saw things through his eyes. Potter clearly wanted to be outraged, but he didn't have the physical and moral strength for this. Neither did he have the strength to fix his cracked round glasses. You think you can't make a mistake? I glared at Potter. But the decisions you make could get you and everyone who follows you killed. Do you understand that? I should have abandoned him. He looked defiantly. You should have notified the competent wizards about what happened. And Sirius is already an adult wizard, and he put you and your friends in danger with his antics. Voldemort has the prophecy. Well, the headmaster smiled reassuringly. Relax. Everything ended well. It depends for whom, Alastor grinned, and in response to the headmaster's questioning look, continued. This rookie caused such a beating in the Death Chamber. There was no stone left unturned, and there were 7 casualties among the Death Eaters, including Crouch. Dumbledore looked at me reproachfully. Don't make that your face, grinned Moody, turning to the headmaster. As we understand it, Max has managed to get the Death Eaters under their own spells and curses. That's good to hear, the headmaster covered his eyes for a few moments. Mr. Knight. I'd like to thank you for your help. No need to, headmaster, I waved it off. I won't detain anyone anymore. You, Mr. Potter, I will ask you to stay. Alastor took a couple of parchments out of his coat, placed them on the headmaster's desk, and headed for the fireplace. I went to the office's exit and then to the common room of the house. Wandering through the dark corridors of the castle, I was thinking about what to do and how to proceed. It is obvious that Voldemort will regret that he did not kill me on the spot, and after my escapade, he will definitely pay close attention to me, which does not promise anything good. Some vague idea was persistently spinning in my head that it was time to move on to decisive and selfless measures. But how? Yes, and it's worth figuring out exactly what passed to me from Crouch's soul. Although I gave the sword the task of sending to rebirth, the sword still took some crumbs. What kind? It is not clear. As with the dragon, I still do not understand what I got from it. As soon as I entered the common room, the eyes of the few students gathered here from the senior courses were directed at me at the same moment. They were clearly curious, but they didn't seem to know the whole story yet, since not a single person involved in the recent mess was here. When I looked around, I didn't notice Hermione. Hermione came by. A couple of students shook their heads negatively. Maybe she decided to stay in the hospital wing? After leaving the common room, I went to the hospital wing. Even though it was the middle of the night, not a single teacher came across. In the hospital wing, Madame Pomfrey confirmed that Hermione was here, but already asleep under her potions, and anyway, the night is no time for visits. I left the hospital wing of the castle, and after putting on a variety of charms of concealment, I left Hogwarts altogether, having moved from the border of anti-apparition charms directly to London. The capital could please with an infrequent sight snow. White and fluffy, right now, large flakes falling from the sky, bringing with them a sense of celebration. This holiday feeling was fueled by the various working establishments, brightly colored storefronts, Christmas decorations on houses and couples or groups of people of various ages, beaming with good mood, subtly hinted that a little more, a couple of days, and Christmas would come. It even seemed that you were about to hear the traditional chimes of bells on Santa's sleigh. Grinning at such thoughts, I moved along one of the central streets, the snow creaking under my feet. Thoughts about the need for decisive action formed in my head into something more definite, and the longer I walked, the more clear the suicidal plan became, immediately requiring implementation. Oh ho ho, came the familiar bird cry behind me, and out of habit, putting my elbow to the side, I could watch Pirate land on it, as if on a perch. And what have you brought me? I smiled at the perpetually disheveled owl. Oh ho! Nothing. Oh ho ho, the pirate stared at me with one eye, opening it wide and as if in shock. You're not such a simple bird, are you, owl? Oh ho! Okay, I've got a job for you. Dropping my bag from my shoulder, I pulled out the parchment. I wrote a small letter on it with magic without a wand and handed it to the pirate, sending it to its destination. Now I could walk around the city some more. 405, Chapter 405. When I reached Piccadilly on foot, deftly dodging the occasional person walking down the street, I heard the familiar oh ho ho as the pirate sat on a lamppost a couple of meters away from me. As soon as I approached, the owl, in its usual manner, dropped the envelope, which had glided precisely into my hands, and then, with a hoot of a goodbye, flew away. I checked the envelope for surprises while it was still flying, so I opened it without fear, and after reading the text, I immediately apparat the way. The spatial puncture of the apparition led me straight to the site for such movements, and opposite stood Delphine's country house, covered with snow, and the witch herself stood in a tightly wrapped robe on the threshold. Judging by the way the robe bulged a little in different places, it was clear to me that some thick clothes with fur or some other collar were under it. We moved towards each other, and the witch took out a small book from under the robe. I hope, she began instead of greeting, that you won't do anything rash. Purely for study purposes, I smiled, accepting the book and placing it in my bag, immediately throwing it over my shoulder. Thank you. When do you want it back? It's a copy. As the saying goes, burn after reading. Will do, I nodded, smiling again. Thank you. Delphine nodded and escorted me back to the grounds, from where I apparat straight to Grimmauld Place, into the now familiar dark passage. After checking the surroundings with the architect's abilities and not finding anything suspicious, I quickly got to the 12th house and went inside. Silence. After hanging my coat on a hanger in the hallway, I cleaned myself of snow and dirt with magic, then went to the hall with a portrait of Walburga. A wonderful night for a walk, isn't it? A painted witch greeted me, contrary to expectations, drinking a glass of no less painted wine. You are right, Lady Walburga. However, I have no time to talk, and therefore, please excuse me. Young people, the lady uttered profoundly, taking a sip of wine. Always rushing somewhere, hurrying, chasing one thing, losing another along the way, and not appreciating what you have. That's not we. That's life, I replied, heading for my office. I heard a quiet and not at all aristocratic snort, showing Walburga's attitude to what I said. Creaker, I said quietly, make me a snack. I'm in my office. Even though the house elf didn't show up, I know he heard me, and so I had no doubt that there would be a snack. Entering the office and inhaling the familiar and pleasant air filled with the aroma of expensive wooden furniture and subtle notes of books in the cabinets, I quickly sat down at the armchair, and took out the book I received from Delphine from my bag. I was only interested in one thing in this book: how a Horcrux is created. Although it is worth reading any other black stuff that is in these secrets of the darkest arts. A minute later, various light snacks appeared on the table, but I was already completely absorbed in fast reading and data processing. Nasty book. Perhaps the most disgusting of all I have read in the restricted section and in the Black's library. Lines, diagrams, and descriptions of various magical manipulations calmly fit into the existing knowledge in my head, forming a kind of the whole picture. It was only in the morning that I finished with the book, destroying it with the help of Incendio and leaning back in an easy chair, allowing my consciousness to process the information. Morning tea, dear head, Kriaker called out to me, but I was only glad of such a thing. The old house elf put a tray with a mug of tea, a teapot, and a plate of very sweet cakes on an empty place at the table, just what my brain needed. Thank you, Kriaker, I nodded, starting on such a breakfast. Old Kriaker is glad to serve the head of the noble and most ancient house of Black faithfully. Sometimes he says such lines, but I think it's useless to do something here, and it's pointless. 406, Chapter 406. A/N, do you want to finish reading the book today? Do it. Now you can, winky face, may the magic be with you. Enjoy. 3. After breakfast, I noticed that the horizon was beginning to lighten outside the window, which meant it was time to move on to the second stage of the experiment. I went down to the first floor and headed for the exit. I put on my coat and enchanted myself with the charms of concealment and so on, an apparat, not just anywhere, but to a dead end in the backyard of the leaky cauldron. Why hadn't I thought of that before? The rules of decency are observed because I didn't apparate into the house. The law is observed, and the charms are not disturbed around the Diagon Alley. You can't apparate from there and there. Quickly opening the passage, I slipped like an invisible shadow into the still empty alley, the stores and shops of which were still closed, and the rare magic lanterns flooded everything with a dim yellow light. Without wasting any time, I headed to Nocturne Alley. The goal is a few hot spots, the memory of which was preserved by Rowena after my personality disorder. It was in these places that I was looking for someone to experiment on. While walking along the alleys, in which the light of day is a rare guest, I thought about a simple question. Why does there even exist such a place as Nocturne Alley? The answer comes by its self-control. If you pin down all these magical incompetents, homeless people, petty thieves, smugglers, and other rabble, then it will automatically go to the outside world, because since they are here, they do not have the skills to make their own safe corner. They'll scatter everywhere, make a mess, threaten the statute of secrecy with their inability to conceal their magic, and so on. And here, in Nocturne Alley, allowing the rabble to live, the ministry keeps it under control, and petty crime is petty enough not to be of interest. The big players, like Borgen and Burks, probably live on kickbacks. Outspoken criminals are being eradicated. At least during that short time of my acquaintance with Nocturne Alley, the owners of several specifically black businesses changed here, and the businesses themselves didn't live long, once turning into ashes. This is one of those firms, new but still alive, that interests me. After passing a couple of suspicious characters, I got to a basement in a ramshackle old stone building and lurked across the street. I waited till dawn, and it was only at first light that a slightly hunched, a massive wizard came out of the basement. From under the black hood of his cloak, an evil and cold look of a seasoned murderer looked at the world. I saw such. Not a maniac, but a murderer. Without any wands or extra movement, I sent a few paralyzing ones at the wizard. He managed to fight off 2 of them instantly but missed the third, falling backwards. I added a few more to be sure, then put him to sleep and transfigured his body into a statuette, immediately using telekinesis and putting it in my pocket. Within a few hours, I had a few more test subjects to experiment with, and after some successful target captures, I walked briskly out of Nocturne and then left the Diagon Alley, apparating back to Grimwald. Without explaining anything to anyone, I walked briskly down to the ritual hall with its smooth walls and floor. I sat on the floor there and began to think about the Horcruxes in more detail, using Rowena's resources in the process. It turned out that to create a Horcrux properly, in the understanding of the author of the book, you need 3 things: a ritual scheme or its equivalent in the form of a spell, a means to shatter the stability of the soul, and an object that will eventually become a Horcrux. The ritual scheme was shown in the book, and its complexity is not too great, something like the soul catcher. It collects and holds either the scattered fragments of the soul or some large part of it. In the case of fragments, the ritual mixes them up thoroughly and then places it in an object, locking it there in a special way. If a piece of the soul is whole, then the mixing stage is omitted. The question is how to damage the soul? Not mine, no, I don't need it. Someone else's. A banal way comes to mind: use Crucio to the point of insanity. You think right in the words that sounded in my head from Rowena. You could literally feel the consonant nods. I have been analyzing the methods of influencing the soul for several months, relying on your both magical and ordinary knowledge and theories. And what conclusions have you come to? There is a high probability that the soul has some infinitesimal particle in all understandings, which is a kind of core. This idea is suggested by theories about the structure of matter, because ordinary science now and then discovers particles that make up larger ones. It is quite possible that sooner or later, some basic particle will be discovered. But that's not the only thing. The Horcruxes known to us didn't show real independence in actions, didn't evolve, and didn't develop. At least based on the available data. They, like a program, acted and influenced the world around them within the limits of the knowledge and worldview that they received at the time of creation. Interesting. And if to remember the old man's words, when I just appeared before him, saying, "You have not passed purification." It turns out that this very purification before rebirth was supposed to remove everything superfluous from life and send only the very core to be reborn. That's how I see it. It turns out that if the world holds the particles belonging to the soul, the wizard can keep himself from leaving the world if he wants and wishes to live. I think so too. But in order to do that, the soul needs to retain the superfluous because it forms the personality, desires, mind, and so forth. Sounds logical. And so we will test this in the simplest and most effective way possible. 407, Chapter 407. Getting up from the floor and taking the wand in my hand, I directed the energy of hemomancy through it because control would be better through the wand. With a few bloody threads, I carved a not particularly intricate ritual scheme on the floor of the ritual hall, consisting of a couple of circles, triangles, and 36 ancient runes. Throwing the bag off my shoulder, I found an almost worn-out pencil there and put it in place in the diagram where the object should lie for. Horcrucification? Horcruxing? Doesn't matter. Taking the figurine of the first test subject out of my coat pocket, I shamelessly threw it into the center of the ritual scheme, cancelling the transformation in flight, and a wizard in dark rags collapsed on the floor. Asleep. Throwing Silencio, Incarcerus at him and awakening him with Renervate, I began to infuse the scheme of the ritual with magic, not paying attention to the wizard, who silently imitated a caterpillar. When the drawings on the floor acquired a slight bluish glow, signaling the readiness of the scheme to capture the particles of the soul, I materialized the spirit sword, still black, with a greenish tint and a rough handle. The wizard began to depict the caterpillar more productively, and turning over on his stomach, began to crawl away, bending his legs under him. With each step I took, I put a simple task before my sword more and more clearly, split the soul in two. When I got close to the wizard, I swung my sword, and I sliced the wizard in two with a sharp movement. To my slight but quickly passed surprise, the wizard himself remained intact, and the ritual scheme became red. The soul was caught, and the process of sealing it in pencil began. I leaned over the wizard and checked his vitals. They were normal. Well, except for the painful spasm of many muscles in his body, the rapid heartbeat, and a face distorted by pain. It took only a couple of seconds for the ritual scheme to finish its work and fade out, leaving behind only engraved patterns on the floor. The wizard was still alive. I walked over to the pencil on the floor and took it in my hands, a strange sensation, but somehow subtly similar to Riddle's diary. And the locket, of course. I went beyond the edge of the circuit and sat on the floor, waiting for the subject to come to his senses. After a couple of minutes, the test subject recovered, and after assessing his position, tried to crawl away again, carefully imitating a caterpillar. However, it remains a mystery to me, where is he actually going to run, in a confined space? Taking the wand in my hand again, I pointed to the test subject without further ado, sending a clot of Cumilaris into him, scattering the wizard's body. Curiously enough, a clot of the fog of a gloomy bluish hue hung in place of the body. It was small, no bigger than a tennis ball. This clot didn't seem to understand what it was doing here, and if you watch a little longer, you will notice that this clot seems to continue to crawl along the trajectory chosen by the subject. If it's a soul, then he didn't even realize he was dead, Rowena rightly pointed out. The clot began to fade as if it was going into invisibility. Without giving it such an opportunity, I literally jumped on the spot, instantly flying up to the clot and cutting it with a newly materialized sword, mentally giving the command to the sword, destroy. The clot literally flew apart in a rapidly disappearing cloud of fog, and in its place for a couple of moments hung a tiny, almost indistinguishable point of light, which literally fell into space. He's passed on. So, with my sword, I destroyed all that was on his soul? And left without all this, that very piece no longer had any attachment to the Horcrux, as in fact memories, will, mind and other things, and therefore freely left the world? It looks that way, but it needs confirmation. After destroying the Horcrux pencil with my sword, I pulled out the rest of the figurines. Time for experiments. 408, Chapter 408. A/N, do you want to finish reading the book today? Do it. Now you can, Winky Face, may the magic be with you. Enjoy. 3. It took me almost a day of complete self-isolation in the ritual hall of the Black's home to get a strong headache at my disposal along with more or less formed concepts of the soul, Horcrux, and the capabilities of my sword. The first thing to note and what is the most important achievement is the firm belief that the soul really has a core around which everything else grows. Even if this confidence has no mathematical or any other scientific justification, but the usual observations of the course of experiments were enough for me. I even had to ask Kriaker to catch or buy some animals for the variety and purity of the experiment. He fulfilled this request. Experiments with the creation of Horcruxes of animals made it clear that a certain core of the soul of humans and animals looks and feels the same. Still, Everything else that accumulates around this core is different both qualitatively and quantitatively. The second important observation is that the cleansed core really has no connection with the Horcrux. The anchor can be called in different ways. Yes, Rowena and I thought about this after the first experiment, but all subsequent experiments have shown that it is the fat that the core has grown over during life, being separated and protected from the dispersion by binding to matter. That is the reason why a soul with the remnants of fat, if there is will and desire, can remain in the world. I even conducted one experiment in which I separated the soul of a subject, but I didn't make a Horcrux out of the resulting part but simply kept it in the ritual scheme. While the shard is inside the circuit, the soul of the murdered subject still remains in the world, but as soon as the scheme is broken, it seems to fall into space together with the shard. The third important observation is that my spirit sword is a unique tool for working with the soul. Of course, I understood this before, but now this understanding has acquired a slightly different level. Very specific magical skills, knowledge, and calculations are needed to work with the soul. Any attempt to do as wizards are used to with a wave of a wand always turns out to be a failure due to the huge consumption of magic or the disruption of the contours of almost formed spells. However, the sword, being a kind of materialization of my own soul, works perfectly with other souls. All these thoughts began to take shape, albeit not very clear, but the idea of how to kill Voldemort bypassing his Horcruxes. I just need to cut him down. It sounds extremely easy and about as difficult to do. There is a lot of his own magic around him, and he can easily control this magic. Take, for example, one of the variants of telekinesis. With the help of magic you direct your magic in a trickle to an object and broadcast your desire to it, take off. Or whatever. Voldemort is surrounded by a huge amount of magic, occupying about 2 meters in radius. In this zone, he doesn't need volitional efforts to perform simple manipulations with its help, and the sensitivity to magical and other manifestations should be simply enormous. Perhaps his magic takes up such a volume when he is in combat mode, but it is worth counting on the worst, taking as an axiom that this is his natural background. The problem here is that there's simply no way to get to him. No way, at all. All manipulations take time, and even to just fall out of the shadows and strike, I will need time for which he will easily react. Delphina has a magical background similar in nature, but there it is smaller and quieter. So does Dumbledore, but the volume is within reason. Unlike the density of magic, but the density is a product of control and active thinking. That's why when the headmaster manifests his magical power, it's as if he glows in perception. Without light, of course, as well as other visual manifestations, it is only an association. A kind of flicker from the density of magic. And Voldemort is pressing. It's hard to put that kind of feeling into words. You could solve this problem with a firearm, for example. Take a bullet, enlarge it with Engorgo, apply the necessary runes, return it to its original size, put it back in the cartridge, and that's it, the weapon is ready. However, this is only a means of killing the body, and I need to get Voldemort with a sword. It's possible to implement a soul catcher in a bullet, but the problem is that the soul catcher and the soul don't get along well together. This is related to the problem of the short shelf life of the soul in the soul catcher. And if the soul understands exactly what happened, it will be able to free itself. Well, at least I think so. And Voldemort has a lot of experience living without a body. After weighing all the pros and cons, having dined on Kreaker's culinary masterpieces, I left the house on Grimmauld. There wasn't a star in the already darkened London night sky, just a glow from the city in the clouds. There was almost no snow left from the recent snowfall, and the festive mood from various decorations no longer appeared. Christmas is tomorrow. 409, Chapter 409. How to get close to Voldemort. Or break through his defenses. He is stronger, more experienced. And in the end, he's just angrier. This is important, given his dark magical specialization. From a tactical point of view, I just need to wait for some kind of mess with his participation, guess the moment, and get closer by striking with a sword. But when will it be? It's hard to say. And problems can start at any moment. I have attracted his attention. I have to finish him off. If you believe the rumors at Hogwarts and Tonks words, then cases of missing wizards have already become more frequent. I can bet that ordinary people as well. How to overpower Voldemort in a direct confrontation. Direct and uncompromising? I'm detecting the birth of a brilliant idea. Rowena's snide voice in my head knocked me off this very thought. Go see Delphine. Why? I said out loud, unwittingly, but it was this mistake that managed to get my thoughts back on track. Without warning about my visit in advance, I apparat at the coordinates known to me to the place to which I had access. Once on the apparition platform near Lady Greengrass's country house, which was still covered with snow, I walked along the path to the wooden mansion, inadvertently admiring the barely visible pale blue snow around and the tall coniferous trees of the forest standing very close to it. A soft yellow light was burning in the house's windows, which gave hope that Delphine was at home. When I reached the door, it swung open to let me in, and then slammed shut when I walked in. Standing in the vestibule, which was level below the general floor, I enjoyed breathing in the warm air with pine scents wafting through it. The source of the scent interested me, and as soon as I cleared myself with magic and walked into the spacious main hall, lit by the fireplace and a couple of lights, I immediately noticed the decorated Christmas tree. Everything on it was as it should be, colorful shiny balls of different sizes, stars, soft yellow lights like garlands. Without an invitation, came Delphine's voice, coming from the big sofa in front of the fireplace. There was no reproach in this voice, just a statement of fact. I walked across the hall and sat down in an armchair that stood, as it were, between the sofa and the fireplace. Delphine was sitting relaxed on this big sofa, dressed in a rather simple and long light dress. Her thick braid of almost white hair rested habitually on her right shoulder. In her hands, Lady Greengrass was holding a book that she had apparently been reading before my visit. Not much light, but enough, and there are spells for such situations. I apologize for the late unannounced visit, I apologized, looking at Delphine. She closed the book, placed it on her lap, and looked back at me. Has something happened? I need your help. Delphine nodded, like, go on. But I turned my gaze to the decorated Christmas tree. Christmas. A good reason for a beautiful decoration, Lady Greengrass shrugged. Can you arrange the same ritual as last time? Why? I stared at Delphine for a few seconds and didn't know exactly what to say. But what's the point of spreading secrecy out of the blue? In that state, I plan to destroy the Dark Lord. Delphine opened her eyes wide in surprise, looking at me. What nonsense! She shook her head dejectedly. Lady Greengrass. But Delphine interrupted my beginning speech with a stopping gesture of her hand. I didn't spend a lot of time and effort on your training so that you would go and kill yourself at the Dark Lord. I have calculated and thought everything out. You're forgetting about the prophecy, she said somewhat harsher. And we don't know its contents, I responded similarly to her. Dumbledore is silent, and Potter has lost this prophecy. That's it. And if indeed only young Mr. Potter is capable of defeating the Dark Lord? Then how will your fight end, no matter how strong you make yourself? I'll slip on my robe like Dumbledore. Delphine looked at me in surprise. You don't know yet? Oh. 410, Chapter 410. A/N, do you want to finish reading the book today? Do it. Now you can, Winky Face, may the magic be with you. Enjoy. 3. Without much enthusiasm, simply and factually, I told about the recent events at the Ministry. Delphine listened calmly, without emotion, clarifying only a few points of interest to her. You have revealed yourself too much, she stated the obvious fact when I finished my story. The Dark Lord let you go, but he didn't know yet how much damage you did to his elite. Now he knows for sure, and you really caught his attention. That's why I need this ritual. All in, so to speak. Delphine shook her head again. It's not easy for me to decide to hand you the means to go on a suicide mission. So, look at it from a different angle, I smiled. You will hand me the means so that by going, I will not kill myself. What about the prophecy? If there is even a slight chance that only Potter can defeat the Dark Lord because of it, then all your attempts will be useless and will only lead you, at best, to death. I was a little hesitant here, but as I know, it is extremely difficult to break the prophecy, and forces outside of this world are capable of doing so. Even if you consider that I appeared before the utterance of the prophecy, my spiritual weapon arrived years after the utterance of the prophecy. There's a good chance it could be considered an out-of-this-world force. I have to try. I don't know, and I'm afraid to even guess how long it will take for Potter to defeat the Dark Lord. 6 months? A year? 10 years? What can happen during this time? Already now, by circumstantial evidence, we can count at least a dozen victims among wizards and an unknown number among ordinary people. There will be more. You're worried not about them, are you? Smiled Delphine weakly, looking at me. It wasn't so much a question as a statement. Yes, I decided not to lie. I am concerned about my well-being and the people important to me. The activities of the Dark Lord, which he may soon promote, as well as his attention to me, are not at all conducive to that well-being. Well, and time is working against me. Delphine looked at me in silence, tapping her index finger on the cover of the book lying in her lap. She was clearly thinking about something. How to bury me herself so that others wouldn't get that honor. All right. After all, if I don't help, you'll come up with some unusual way to get what you want on your own. Right. The corners of Delphine's mouth twitched slightly, expressing a very slight smile. Come back in 3 days. I'll prepare everything. Judging by the fact that Delphine opened the book again right after that sentence, I could tell that she was somewhat disappointed? Offended? In general, she expressed her displeasure. Thank you, I smiled and, getting up from the chair, went to the exit of the house. When I reached the apparition site, I moved to the border of the protective barrier of Hogwarts and, on the move, conjuring a complex of concealing charms on myself, hurriedly moved to the castle. When I got inside, I wasn't surprised by the silence and the dimmed lights out. After sneaking in quietly and passing McGonagall patrolling the castle, I had no trouble getting to the common room, where some of the members of the recent operation to rescue Sirius were found. Taking off my disguise, I proceeded to an empty sofa and, with some fatigue, simply flopped down on it, spreading myself unwillingly on such a comfortable seat. My return didn't go unnoticed, but only the twins approached me. Max, the left one spoke, keeping an atypical seriousness on his face. We wanted to thank you. To my surprise, the other twin did not continue the sentence. For what? For saving us, the first said again, and the second only nodded. Your advice on spells for training, your help at the ministry. Without that, we could have easily died. I could only nod at that. After a quick look around the common room, I noticed other members of that action, along with the ordinary members of Dumbledore's army. Yes, not everyone was here. Yes, there were guys from other houses, but it's not uncommon friends bring friends. Are you thanking me on behalf of everyone else? Don't get them wrong, the other twin smiled a little sadly. They're grateful, too, just afraid of you. Everything came back to normal, and the twins began to finish phrases one for the other. Afraid? Well, of course. The second one smiled sparingly. You've shown yourself to be a very powerful wizard. We haven't seen anything like this yet. And how should I say? Killed, the first twin finished clearly, immediately placing his palms out in front of him in a defensive gesture. No, no, we don't blame you. After all, they were the wizards without whom the world would be a better place. And Azkaban has proven to be no panacea. Okay, guys. Where's Hermione? In her room, I think. Probably asleep. It's late. And she hasn't looked up from her books since we got back. Thanks, I nodded to the guys, and they nodded back and returned to the others. There was nothing else for me to do in the common room, so I went to shower and sleep. 411, Chapter 411. The days until the ritual was ready dragged on extremely slowly. It started right away on the morning of December 25th, and with every hour, the waiting became more and more tedious. I didn't find Hermione in the common room when I went out for my morning run and other physical exercises, but there was Lavender hurrying somewhere. Hi, I waved my hand in greeting, and the blonde turned around abruptly. Oh, hi, smiled Lavender, recognizing me. I didn't expect anyone to wake up this early. I wake up like this every day. Listen, is Hermione going to practice today? Hermione, Lavender thought for a moment. Well, there's a snoring lump lying in bed, pulling the blanket up over her curly head. She was buried in books almost until morning, so it's unlikely. Yet? Well, okay. Everyone needs a rest sometimes. Max, I have to run, I have to see McGonagall. The blonde hurriedly retreated, and I just shrugged my shoulders and headed off to practice. The day began on the usual schedule. After training, showering, and breakfast, which was skipped by Hermione, I went to the restricted section, but not so much for reading as for brainstorming. Considering that when I have a personality disorder during the ritual, I acquire some very different life reference points, I need to set myself the task of going to Voldemort's lair and killing him with a sword. That's where I can help. Rowena expressed a simple idea that if these three individuals were informed about the goal in the current situation, they would go to fulfill it. The reason for this is simple: they have my knowledge, which means they will be well aware of the danger that Voldemort poses right now. In general, the probability that my body would go out and kill the Dark Lord on its own after the ritual is quite high. And how to set the right task before the sword? I can set a task. So it turns out that I rely on 4 schizophrenias in my head for the success of a vital event? Something like that. Imagine that this is a squad of 3 fighters, and you sent them on a mission. Wonderful. However, I have no other option, and I don't flatter myself that I will be able to overpower Voldemort in open combat, even with my various trump cards. Unless, at the crucial moment, I could make use of the phase inversion magic that I had developed. But that would have to be used at the crucial moment, so that he wouldn't have time to realize and take action. And I also need to finish the laser. Right now. Closer to lunch, Hermione visited the restricted section and wanted to study the books, but when she saw me, she came over. Hi, Max. Hi, Miona, I smiled back. We need to talk. The girl looked extremely serious, which means that the conversation should not be postponed. I'm listening to you carefully. The girl pulled out her wand and waved it around us, casting muffling charms. Only after that, she sat down on a bench nearby. She was looking somewhere to the side, and after a couple of seconds of silence, she spoke. I've been thinking for a long time. About different things. I was thinking about the battle at the Ministry. I counted more than 10 scenarios in which you wouldn't have to kill anyone. I have to admit, there were options. The most obvious one is to pick up Sirius together with you, arrange an explosive wave from the short apparition and go on the defensive. Here. I had no doubt that you had calculated at least several scenarios. But you chose to kill consciously and unnecessarily. Not without reason. First they were Death Eaters. To be more precise, almost everyone was in the so-called inner circle, according to the publicly available interrogation protocols of the late Karkaroff. The list of their deeds and crimes is worth half a dozen life sentences or the death penalty. Is this really a reason to kill them? Hermione finally looked at me, and her face expressed an incomprehensible mixture of anxiety with something else, even though the emotions were noticeably muffled by occlumency. And if not, then what? DMLE and Aurors are powerless and can only work from the defense. Perhaps right now, the one I wouldn't have killed would be enjoying someone's torment and agony, depriving the family of a father, mother, or their children. But to kill? What about the situation after the World Cup? Hermione looked at me like I was a stupid schoolboy. We were trapped. We didn't really know how to do anything, if seriously. We couldn't defeat them, just as we couldn't apparate or use short apparition. You, it seems to me, couldn't win. But to kill in response to a killing curse. It's easier than winning. Suppose. A hopeless situation. What about training in healing magic? That's not it. In rare moments, I saw something in Lady Greengrass's gaze. Vindictive, yes, Hermione nodded to her own words. It was her personal revenge that she combined. So to speak, pleasant with useful. I don't know the reasons, but that's her business. It seems to me that she would have killed them anyway, and the only question was whether these deaths would be of use. 412, Chapter 412. A/N, do you want to finish reading the book today? Do it. Now you can, Winky Face, may the magic be with you. Enjoy. 3. That's kind of weird, by your logic. I looked at Hermione. It's not weird, the girl shook her head. There was no choice in those situations. But at the Ministry, there was. Let's say. There were options, even if not the best. It should be understood that Dolohov had to be killed anyway, he is too dangerous. Crouch had artifacts on which the isolation of the Ministry was tied. If they were not removed, then the protection could well be crushed, and the help might not be in time. And then you would have to kill to survive, but at the same time, the others were also under attack. I brought 4 of them under their own curses with the help of space transfiguration. And the 7th one was for fun, right? Yes, that's right, and not at all because he wanted to cut off my head himself. I understand all that, but... your choice to kill. You went there already with that thought and with that purpose. I could see it in your face. Worried, tense, counting on the worst, yes. But even after seeing other options, you started exactly to kill. It's not like they wanted to capture me, either. Okay. As I understand it, you are leading to something else. Hermione became so worried that even through the occlumency, it came through, and she inadvertently began to pull the edge of her skirt with her hands. You're becoming like him. Is someone in the way? Kill. Someone disagrees, kill. Threatens? Kill. How soon are you going to throw Cruciatus at wizards for saying the wrong word? You're exaggerating, I shook my head. I say what I see. I can accept a person as a comrade or friend who, out of all possible options, chooses to kill an inconvenient person. As a comrade, a friend. But more. Hermione looked into my eyes, trying to find something there. And I don't repent, nor do I consider myself wrong. But I don't want to change her mind either. It seems that she needs to take a sip of the rottenness of the world, not like now, not in rare cases, like going to the movies. Maybe then she can see more. Hermione covered her eyes and shook her head. I can't. I took a deep breath, but not for comfort or anything else. It was as if I was released. Well. Putting my hands on my knees, I stood up. Your position is clear to me. Shall we proceed to the library? You're not mad? Or? No, I shook my head negatively. Somewhere subconsciously, I knew you might take it that way. That's why I didn't often take you on my various adventures. We just see the world and magic differently. Where you see beauty and miracles, I see human dirt, rot, and a sea of problems. You still study various really beautiful charms and rune chains, don't you? Yes. The girl nodded somehow guiltily, lowering her gaze. So we will continue like this. Look at magic and the world as something beautiful, and I'll do the rest. Now I was planning to finish a couple of my spells. You're probably going to finish your part of the section. Yes, the girl nodded a little more briskly. That's great. And so these 3 days passed. What has changed? Well, the awkward silence on Hermione's part, which I dispelled by discussing something from magic or exchanging mutual assistance in difficult moments for us personally. There was no more comfortable lying lap on our sofa in the common room, which the others immediately noticed, but they were in no hurry to ask. At the end of the third day after Christmas, when the students' excitement over the gifts they had received had subsided and been replaced by anxious rumors from the ministry, I finally finished my laser spell. Theoretically. Practically, there was no place to test it because it was very powerful, and if I activated it from under the inversion of the magic phase, it wouldn't give a damn about protection. After dinner, when I was already in our room with the guys and was about to leave the castle and went out into the common room, Lavender intercepted me, dragging me by the elbow to the side. What happened between you and Hermione? Nothing. Don't lie to me, the blonde pouted, becoming like some kind of hamster. You two were kind of dating. It was hard not to notice, how different things are between you guys these days. Ask Hermione. She won't say. What do you say? Lavender put her hands to her sides. And what's it to you, Lavender, anyway? What do you mean? I'm the head girl, and it's my direct responsibility to keep order and tranquility at the house. Believe me, Max, your incomprehensible situation with Hermione, even if it's not obvious, breaks this calm with an irresistible force. When something that has become familiar over the years suddenly changes like this, it is very disturbing. We didn't agree on the points of view on various life circumstances. I won't say more. Lavender sighed sadly. Okay. After such a useless conversation, I decided to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything. Suit, coat, scarf. Is it winter outside? Not a problem. Winter is not severe here. I don't wear a hat, I'm healthy, I don't care about anything. Bag over my shoulder, wand in a holster, only pity that the second wand has died the death of a pencil, and a cane, which now lies reduced in a special pocket, is now just a cane. After leaving the common room, I immediately cast concealing charms on myself and quickly wandered away from the castle. A dark winter evening greeted me with a clear starry sky and a cool breeze in my face. The snow that had fallen a couple of days before Christmas had already melted or been carried away by the wind, and no new snow had fallen yet. Maybe it won't fall again. That's the climate here. It seems to be a minus, but snow is a rare guest. 413, Chapter 413. Crossing the border of anti-apparition charms, I moved to the country house of Lady Greengrass and walked briskly to the door. Like last time, soft yellow light was burning in the windows, and as soon as I went inside, I smelled warmth, some fresh pastries, and there was still a decorated Christmas tree in the corner by the fireplace. A house elf in a clean pillowcase ran through the main hall, cheerfully tapping her heels on the floor, carrying a freshly cooked pie in her outstretched arms. The house elf was in a hurry, and when she saw me out of the corner of her eye, she almost jumped in surprise and stopped, looking at me, then at the pie, then at me again. There was a kind of panic on the house elf's face, and she didn't know exactly what to do. In the end, she just disappeared with the pie, immediately appearing next to me. Lady Delphine is waiting for you in the hall, yes. Where she was last time. Yes, yes, the house elf nodded. This house elf will definitely punish herself, but there's no way she can see the guest off. I'll walk myself, don't worry. Well done. The house elf straightened up and disappeared, and from the kitchen, which was far away in the right wing, there was a barely distinguishable noise. She went about her business. After cleaning myself with magic, I headed along the route already known to me to the -2nd basement level, where a passage was opened. Once again, in the clean and almost empty ritual hall, I noticed Delphine sitting in a chair against the wall, reading a book under the light of a lumos. She turned her attention to me at once and, putting the book down on the armrest, stood toward me. You haven't changed your mind? Not at all, I shook my head negatively and took the bag off my shoulder, handing it to Delphine. Let it stay with you for now. Lady Greengrass took the bag in one hand, and in the other, she suddenly had a bottle with a potion. It looked exactly the same as the last time. You already know the procedure. I took the potion and stood in the center of the already prepared ritual scheme. After drinking the potion and throwing the bottle aside, I saw Delphine activate the circuit. Good luck, she nodded briefly, took the bag, and operated. The hum of my own pulse sounded in the ears again. A clear mental attitude has been formed, Rowena informed me. I think I can coordinate the actions of your personalities. I hope so. Another rumbling sound of my heart and the noise of blood in my ears. The world once again seemed to explode in a multitude of shards, shattering like a mirror. As soon as the ritual diagram in the middle of the closed stone hall went out, the tall blonde man in a black suit and cloak, standing in the middle of the diagram, changed subtly. Looking for a few seconds with burning blue eyes somewhere beyond the walls surrounding him, he jerked his head a couple of times in extremely quick, jerky movements. Pesky little voice. He said sparingly into nowhere. The second one growls correctly. The threat to the nest must be eliminated. The blonde immediately disappeared into an apparition funnel, appearing at the very top of one of the tallest coniferous trees in the forest nearby. He stood on it as if he had no weight, and the top didn't even budge beneath him. The boy looked up to the sky, looking at the glowing half of the moon's disk. Reaching out to it, he covered the dark part of it. Only half. He disappeared again into the vortex of the apparition. In the county of Wiltshire, on the edge of a fairly large flat clearing surrounded on all sides by a low forest, a tall young boy with blonde hair appeared from the funnel of the apparition. He looked silently at the large old stone mansion, although it was hidden by all possible charms and except that Fidelius was not on it. It was in this mansion, in the middle of a high stone hall with rich decorations, engravings, and other design solutions designed to show the monumentality of the house and the prosperity of its owners, that the wizard, Voldemort, known to many, gathered his faithful and less faithful henchmen at a long wooden table for the umpteenth time. He was eager to find out what successes they could boast of and how well his errands were being carried out because the recent partial failure had caused many irreparable losses in his ranks. No one could tell how the blonde man, Max Knight, knew that the Dark Lord was in the building, but it wasn't important. Taking a step across the clearing in the direction of the house, he dragged behind him 3 limp bodies, some tramps he caught in Nocturne Alley before coming here. Werewolves, or just criminals? History is silent about this. After taking only a couple of steps, Max jerked his head suddenly and elusively, looking at the mansion with blazing blue eyes. Wasting my energy on such garbage. With these words, the boy pulled the magic wand out of the holster on his forearm with one hand and set the other aside. At the same moment, one of the limp bodies of the tramps levitated into the hand set aside, and Max firmly took him by the neck, simultaneously pointing his wand at the Malfoy family mansion. The tramp twitched like having a seizure and bright red veins started to cover his body, drying up, and on the tip of Max's wand, in the blink of an eye, 6 complex rune schemes formed from blood, one after the other. They began to glow red, and the brighter they became, the more the tramp dried up. 414, Chapter 414. A/N, do you want to finish reading the book today? Do it. Now you can, Winky Face, may the magic be with you. Enjoy. 3. One of the werewolves that stood around the perimeter of the hall, where the next meeting of Death Eaters was taking place, noticed a strange red glow on the horizon. The beastly part of this wizard sensed incredible danger, and it gave the werewolf the courage to interrupt the Dark Lord himself. My lord! The werewolf shouted, drawing the attention of everyone present. Voldemort, sitting in his black robe at the head of the table, slowly turned to him, smiling. There! The werewolf pointed his hand out the window, and everyone who could see the red dot from their seat immediately glanced at it, including Voldemort. Either by instinct or luck, but the Dark Lord realized something, immediately got up from his seat, instantly approaching the window and breaking it with the power of thought, pointed his wand toward the dot, and a dark sphere began to form rapidly on the tip of his white, bone-like wand. My lord! Several wizards immediately appeared beside him, including Bellatrix. She was the one who spoke. Has something happened? But no one got an answer. The dark sphere at the tip of Voldemort's wand instantly turned into a powerful black beam, followed by a shock wave and wind, causing the Death Eaters to retreat to the sides. But there, from the edge of the forest, the red dot turned into an equally powerful blue beam. A wild rumble and crackling, drowning out everything around it, filled the space. The 2 beams met for a moment, creating a powerful shockwave and deflecting each other from the trajectory. A powerful blow shook the Malfoy mansion, and those present in the hall could see how the protection that appeared for a moment shattered like glass, and the blue beam didn't leave a trace of one of the wings of the house, taking with it one of the walls of the conference room. The black beam, on the other hand, had ploughed a great furrow in the ground all the way to the edge of the forest, but it was clearly well away from where the red light had originated. The Death Eaters were shocked and didn't move. The worst were a few who weren't known for their bravery, like young Draco Malfoy. They were literally falling to the floor, trembling from the magical pressure. Who dare? Bellatrix immediately became enraged, pulling out her wand and glaring angrily into space through a couple of unruly strands of black hair that had fallen on her face. Stay calm, Voldemort replied quietly. Soon, we will know, and he will answer. Just as Voldemort said, in a few moments, a tall boy with blonde hair appeared from the apparition funnel a few dozen yards from the mansion. He was dragging some poor guy behind him, as if on a rope, but he looked as if the poor guy weighed nothing at all. The Dark Lord waved his black cloak spectacularly, turned, and headed for the resulting breach in the wall. About a dozen Death Eaters, who had the strength and self-control to stay on their feet, followed him out into the street. And who do we have here? Voldemort theatrically spread his arms to the sides at the sight of Max, but all he got in return was a bombarda, which he took aside, and the spell blew to smithereens the remains of one of the walls of the manor. With a mixture of hatred and interest, Bellatrix looked at the one who had dared not only to destroy part of her sister's house but also to defy the Dark Lord himself so brazenly. You! The surprise of the slightly insane brunette was unparalleled when she recognized in the attacking wizard her sister's second son, who was so imprudently kicked out of the family by the idiot Lucius in the most radical way possible. Several Death Eaters wanted to attack the boy, but Voldemort stopped their impulse with just a gesture of his hand. Don't interfere. I'll kill him myself. Max, on the other hand, tilted his head slightly to the side, looking around at those present. Run, and you can survive, he said dryly, but the boy's voice seemed to echo through the heads of those present. Max stretched out his hand to the side, and the tramp that the boy was dragging behind him quickly flew into it. Max squeezed his hand on the tramp's throat, and he literally began to crack, glowing red from the inside. Within seconds he crumbled to ash, and the red streams that flew out of him were consumed by the boy. It's him. The thought of the treacherous escape was beating in Bellatrix's mind, interrupted by conflicting feelings. A strong relative, but attacked the Dark Lord. But a relative. The son of her beloved sister. Snorted Voldemort, waving his wand sharply and creating a giant snake of fiend fire, which immediately headed for the boy. Max merely waved his hand with a wand as if swatting away a fly, and the snake of fiend fire seemed to fade in the wind. Pathetic travesty, Max said quietly and waved his wand again. Shaz SSSA. 415, Chapter 415. The Death Eaters present here fell into a stupor, recognizing the familiar Parseltongue and the fiend fire that escaped from Max's wand, which began to take the shape and size of a giant basilisk, only intensified this feeling. A snake of flame began to coil around Max, and he pointed his wand in the direction of the wizards, hissing something in Parseltongue again. Get back! Shouted one of the Death Eaters, and it served as a kind of trigger. Everyone immediately rushed away, putting up defenses. The basilisk of fiend fire rushed at the Dark Lord with incredible speed, who responded with some sort of volumetric spell, creating a cloud of darkness. Moving a safe distance away, the Death Eaters formed a defense and watched the scene unfold. An incomprehensible, completely black smoke structure was struggling with a frantically moving basilisk of fire. They were really huge, and the light from the flames illuminated everything around them and created incredible waves of heat. In all this wild dance, dazzling flashes of spells and shields flashed every now and then, the power of the magic invested in which pressed even at a great distance. Sometimes the spells ricocheted away, destroying half the manor, then flying into the woods, exploding deafeningly. From this completely incomprehensible, rolling on the ground mess of a dark cloud and a fiery basilisk, lightning flew every now and then, exploding the earth. Sometimes you could see two powerful smoke trails from a short apparition, and these two clouds mercilessly and with great speed threw at each other a variety of different spells, including dark ones. A very quick beam from one of these spells ricocheted into the Death Eater's defenses but ignored them completely, vaporizing the upper half of Rodolphus Lestrange's body. So the family was completely destroyed because the second brother died in the ministry, trying to get to Max from behind. Stronger shields! Yelled one of the Death Eaters. Bellatrix noticed out of the corner of her eye how the remaining ones ran out of the remnants of the manor and rushed away towards the forest. Draco was among them. It's good that Narcissa went to France for a month and doesn't see this shame, flashed through Bella's head, and then another thought appeared, what would Severus say if he saw his student in such a role? Both students. However, outside thoughts didn't prevent the woman from closely watching the battle of the two wizards, whose powers, apparently, are equal. The destructive and subtly fast scuffling of the dark cloud and the basilisk from the fire gradually shifted towards the forest, in the opposite direction from the Death Eaters, but no one expressed a desire to come closer. By the time Bella had lost count of the spells Voldemort and Max had cast, and the outlines of the wizards were already indistinguishable in this dance of fire, flares, and darkness, it was suddenly over. No one died, no one won, but the cloud of darkness and the basilisk had used up the power they had invested in them, self-destructing. Under the light of the stars and half the moon, on a huge scorched patch of earth, a dozen meters apart, stood terribly battered, bloody in places, but still alive Voldemort and Max. The Dark Lord's robe was streaked with gaps, burnt holes, and his left sleeve was gone. Max didn't look any better. From the guy's coat, there was only a memory, as well as from the jacket. The vest and shirt were held together by a pair of threads. Max threw off the remnants of the interfering fabric in one motion, exposing a trained body with old and newly received scars. The two wizards stood silently and looked at each other. Some Death Eaters, including Bella, noticed a fact that at another time would have seemed funny to them. Voldemort's eyes were burning red, and Max's were blue. One was painfully thin, the other sporty. One looked at the enemy with hatred, and the other just looked. You can't win, Max Knight, Voldemort's voice rang out over the hushed clearing. There is no magic that I don't know. And I have something that you don't have. Max only tilted his head slightly, looking at the Dark Lord as if he were a bug in an entomologist's collection. I've learned the secret of immortality, proclaimed Voldemort. Max didn't say anything, just shifted the wand to his left hand. Is that supposed to mean something? The Dark Lord grinned. It doesn't matter. Bow to your death, Max Knight. They both waved their wands at the same time. Avada Kedavra! Shouted Voldemort, and an unbearably bright green flash blinded those present for a moment. Only a few who really knew their lord could have predicted such a powerful spell in his execution, so they were ready and didn't lose their sight for a moment. To their surprise, Max didn't fall dead, but a dull green shield appeared around him. Max at great speed, holding this shield, began to approach Voldemort, and the Avada beam broke on the shield like a jet of water on glass. A brief moment and Max cut the Dark Lord's body in two with the black sword that suddenly appeared in his hands. The Death Eaters stared in disbelief as their lord's body slowly sank to the ground, falling apart in half. At that moment, black smoke began to escape from Voldemort's body, filling everything around and instantly surrounding Max. A wild cry of anger echoed around from this smoke, and in the smoke itself, the Dark Lord's face distorted with anger flashed every now and then. This smoke tried to attack the guy who was completely hidden inside. Flashes of light appeared one by one in the black smoke, and the characteristic whistle of the air repeatedly cut by the sword reached the ears of the wizard standing in a stupor. The black smoke gradually faded, and now Voldemort's face was trying not to attack, plunging into the smoke, but on the contrary, to escape, to fly away, and anger was replaced by despair. But something kept him from leaving this place. Perhaps the reason for this was the thinnest red threads flickering around as if pulling the smoke to the center. The smoke took up less and less space, melting pieces fell away from it, and now almost nothing was left of it, only a tiny ghost of the Dark Lord's head. Max looked at him for a split second, then pierced him with a sword, and the ghost burst like a watermelon and the remnants of black smoke melted into the air, as did Voldemort's body. Only a tiny light dot hovered over the blade of the sword. It blinked a couple of times and seemed to disappear into space. Each Death Eater felt the marks on their hands disappear. They immediately began to examine their hands with disbelief, missing the moment when the blond man, battered in a hard battle, staggered, his sword literally soaked into his hand. Making an awkward step to the side, the guy disappeared into the funnel of the apparition. Perhaps only Bella saw her nephew disappear after defeating the Dark Lord. Her nephew, her lord, the conflict of values has just begun its dance in the thoughts of a woman, but even so. Not believing, but deep down clearly understanding that this time Voldemort definitely died. A vague understanding of the situation came to me at the moment when I was standing in front of the remnants of Voldemort's soul, raising my sword to pierce it. Everything went relatively well, Rowena immediately reported. With great difficulty and with the remnants of my strength, I formulated the message for the sword, destroy. Only then did I pierce the Dark Lord's soul, which had the appearance of his head. It burst, melted, leaving behind only a tiny dot of light, which was carried away through space, most likely for rebirth. My whole body ached. I had no strength mentally or physically. I felt a few near-zero weakened curses and bleeding wounds on my body. Gathering my will into a fist, I found the strength to apparate away. Almost falling out like a sack onto the apparition platform near Delphine's house, I staggered to the door. The world was floating around me, and I was nauseous. Halfway there, I heard the door opening sound, but it was problematic to see something my gaze didn't want to focus and constantly jumped to the side. Feeling the familiar magic nearby in the hands that immediately wrapped around me, trying to support me, I regained my composure for a moment. I won. I said quietly, spitting blood. Reduced him to atoms. Struggling to move my legs and leaning on Delphine, who helped me walk, I reached the house and stepped inside. As soon as I touched the sofa, darkness enveloped my consciousness. 416, Chapter 416. A/N, do you want to finish reading the book today? Do it. Now you can, Winky Face, may the magic be with you. Enjoy. 3. Consciousness returned with difficulty as if floating out of the dark and deep depths of the abyss. There was no way to move or look around. But my thought processes started, and as soon as I became a little more aware of my own self and built a chain of past events, Rowena mercilessly threw a kind of data package about what happened into my consciousness. I performed the mission to kill the Dark Lord in a rather extraordinary way. My consciousness, broken into 3, didn't seem to care about any kind of plan at all. I hit hard, and then it was up to me. Also, I wondered why, in that state, I didn't kill the remaining Death Eaters? Well, or why didn't I strike at them initially? Why guess, though? I wouldn't know anything anyway. Having listened to my senses again, I decided to carry out an easy magical diagnosis. Everything hurt. Not much, but everywhere. The results turned out to be quite good. Multiple curses and injuries, practically minimized during the fight, were cured. Still, the body was worn out and suffered an extremely powerful load, which is why I am suffering now. Opening my eyes, I saw the wooden ceiling of the room allocated to me in Delphine's country house. With difficulty, I turned my head to the side to examine the cause of the strange pressure in my hand and dispel thoughts about casts and fractures, which, despite their illogic, stubbornly climbed into the newly awakened consciousness. The reason turned out to be simple, but unexpected. Sitting on a chair next to the bed and holding my hand by 2 fingers, like a small child, Hermione was sleeping on the same hand in her everyday clothes and robe. Her sleeping face bore the imprint of extreme fatigue. As soon as I tried to move my hand, a clear concern appeared on the sleeping girl's face, and the eyes under the eyelids actively moved. Without waking up, Hermione grabbed my hand more comfortably and fell back into a deep sleep, and an almost imperceptible smile and relief appeared on her face. Women. They scare themselves and then suffer heroically, blaming men for their suffering if possible. What is she doing here, by the way? Delphine invited her as an assistant. You've caught so much weakened, I'm sorry, shit that you could have been made into a visual aid on how not to fight against dark wizards. And what, Delphine couldn't handle it alone. How should I know? Basically, you could have done it yourself, so I think Delphine could have done it too. Maybe she invited Hermione for practice, maybe for something else. Women. She's not you. What do you mean? Hermione, unlike you, doesn't keep a clemency 24/7 tight all year round. She is simply tormented by contradictions. The emotional part in love is struggling with a little girl who believes in ideals and miracles, and the logical part is trying to balance all this. And don't forget, and you know very well yourself, love is blind. The image of a person who has passed through the prism of love is somehow deprived of flaws, but when these flaws become absolutely obvious, the image collapses dramatically. You brazenly take advantage of my abstract knowledge and inferences. I have my own at a minimum, what can I do? You, by the way, have fallen victim to such delusions more than once or twice in your past life, even though you have never loved anyone. It seems that you know a person for many years, and then he pulls some kind of trick, and you don't know how to feel about this. And when you think about it, you realize that a person has always been like this, and your consciousness simply ignored various facts. Okay, my fictional psychologist. For a few minutes, I just looked at the peaceful face of the sleeping Hermione, after which I just grinned, and with an effort, put myself to sleep. 417, Chapter 417. The next awakening brought almost no changes, the same bed and the same wooden ceiling of the room allocated to me. Only Hermione wasn't there, although the chair remained in place. This time I could move without causing pain throughout my body. Technically, I could dull those sensations to the point of ignoring them, but subconsciously they still felt like pain and caused discomfort, so I was glad that I could finally get out of bed. Which, in fact, I did immediately, albeit slowly. I threw off the cover and slowly sat up on the bed. The bandages were tightly wrapped around my torso, my shoulder on my left arm, and my right arm was only affected by the wrist and forearm. My legs were fine, and they didn't get rid of my underwear. Well, I guess. At least it was there. On the bedside table were only my pants and my wand holster. The reduced cane lay on the floor next to my bag and shoes. It appeared to be all that survived, and the rest was rags. As I wiggled my feet on the soft wool carpet of some animal, I slowly got up from the bed, and just as slowly and carefully, so as not to cause sharp pain, began to attach the holster with the wand on my left hand. When I was done, I took the wand out and twirled it in my right hand. The bandages were a little cramped and restricted movement, but that didn't really matter if I wasn't about to learn something new right now. With a light wave of my hand, marking the beginning and end of witchcraft, I transfigured a dark blue robe out of thin air. Holding my creation in my hands, I thought about the inconsistency of actions and, putting the robe on the bed, first put on my pants. I threw the cane into the bag and put it back on the floor next to the bedside table. Only after that did I put on my robe wide open, and with timid steps, ignoring the slight dizziness that appeared and trying to avoid sudden movements, I headed out of the room in search of food. Hunger woke up with me. Slowly reaching the corridor to the house's main hall, I found Hermione and Delphine sitting in chairs and reading something. As soon as I appeared, they immediately turned their eyes from the books to me, and their dissatisfied and at the same time worried looks would make many people feel uncomfortable. Many, but I'm too thick-skinned for that. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other, after which I smiled. Will you feed me? Or do I need to pass out from hunger first? Delphine put the book down on the coffee table next to her chair. I'll go make arrangements. She stood up and headed to the right wing of the house. Under Hermione's watchful gaze, I waddled to the sofa that stood as if in the center and carefully sat down. I had never had to be so careful of sudden movements in this life. Judging. I glanced at Hermione. I don't even know what to judge for, the girl shrugged. Lady Greengrass wrote that you received a fair amount of curses and asked to assist in your treatment. How are you? Concern flashed in Hermione's eyes. Tolerable, I nodded. Thanks for your help. How else? Hermione smiled weakly, but almost immediately, her face became worried. Knowing your capabilities, I can't figure out where you managed to find yourself so many injuries and curses. How long have I been lying here, by the way? 2 days of treatment and a day of sleep. Thinking, I jerked my hand too sharply, immediately paying with a sharp pain in my muscles. Ouch, is the local tabloid journalism silent? Nothing special, except for the sudden appearance of various representatives and heirs of different families from those who are outside the law, but the representatives themselves are clean. It started right after the massacre at the ministry. Perhaps luring Potter out wasn't the only goal at all. On top of that, there is a quiet reshuffle going on in the ministry itself. It's not being advertised, but the guys at Hogwarts are talking about it. I see. And the injuries and curses were received by me in a fight with Voldemort. Hermione couldn't hide her surprise, staring at me with wide eyes. What? With Voldemort? It took the girl a little while to come to her senses. She was clearly holding back the urge to speak out. She fixed a few loose strands of her curly hair in a hair clip with a jerky movement. I won't ask about your motivation in going up against one of the strongest wizards in the world. I suppose you should be glad you got away with such minor, though numerous, injuries. Actually, I won. Surviving can be considered a victory, Hermione nodded importantly. No, Fiona. Destroyed him. 418, Chapter 418. A/N, do you want to finish reading the book today? Do it. Now you can, winky face, may the magic be with you. Enjoy. 3. After my words, surprise appeared on the girl's face, which was quickly replaced by a kind of acceptance of this fact. I won't be surprised by anything anymore. But what about the prophecy? Although, it could well have been misinterpreted. Or something else. But tell me, Max, did you really have to be the one to do it? Who, if not me? Of course, it was possible to wait until Potter was capable of such a thing. A year, 2, 10 years? How many different crimes, murders, and violence would the Death Eaters have committed during this time? You know, I don't think there were many really loyal to the Dark Lord. Surely the overwhelming majority saw in him a path to power or a semblance of legalizing their antisocial needs and desire for violence. Now, since the public still doesn't know about Voldemort's death, and some kind of active activity continues to boil in the Ministry, I can assume several options. It's pretty obvious, Hermione nodded. If that's the case, then those of the Death Eaters who are most adequate will try to grab as much as possible or leave the country in a rush. Maniacs and murderers will lurk, werewolves, whose movement of packs has been a concern to some students' parents, will scatter back to their corners. The Daily Prophet wrote about the giants coming down from their camps in Europe not so long ago. I think that has something to do with it, too. Funny, I smiled. I'm sitting here, all bandaged up in my pants and robe, discussing the situation in the country with my friend, and it wasn't long ago that I had a fight to the death. Hermione smiled and shrugged. Well, I asked about your well-being, and I already know about your state of health. I've been directly involved in the diagnosis and treatment myself. Your state of mind is obviously intact, so there's that. Have you talked enough? Delphine came up to us unnoticed and sat down in her seat. At the same moment, various snacks appeared on the table, and though it was not a dining table, even so, it was quite possible to eat comfortably here. Bon appétit, everyone, I nodded and began to eat. Having conjured Tempest during the meal and making sure it wasn't too late, I decided that after the meal, I should head to Hogwarts and rest there in peace without abusing Lady Greengrass's hospitality. The return to Hogwarts took place after dark and was as casual as ever. Over the past half of the holidays, no one really left school, and the number of remaining students was still very high. Unnoticed by everyone, under the spell of concealment, Hermione and I went into the common room and took our sofa, keeping a small distance from each other. Nearby, at the table, Dean, Seamus, Lavender, and Parvati were once again suffering from idleness, playing something magical, as before. Holidays allowed us to disregard the dress code, but Dean, as always, was all too fond of wearing exactly the school uniform, perfectly fitted and well-groomed. Our absence didn't seem to bother anyone, or maybe the others didn't even notice it. Having settled down on the sofa more comfortably and relaxed, I began to create magic constructs without a wand in order to better hear what was happening. I wonder if there were any rumors. To my great regret, well, or joy, I haven't decided yet, there are no rumors about Voldemort's death at all. But there are a lot of rumors and assumptions about what the young head of Malfoy was playing with that turned the grounds into ashes. One half of the house literally evaporated, and the other half is a ruin. It would seem that this should not concern the Gryffindors, but no, the assumptions are different, one more beautiful than the other, but they all rest on the fact that the vile slug has played with dark magic. Even the investigative department of the DMLE went there but couldn't establish the exact cause of what happened. The magical manipulations were too strong and erased all traces, and the scorched and destroyed desert can be obtained in many dozens of ways, illegal of which are simply beyond the power of even strong wizards. That's the way things are. After hearing enough, I said goodbye to those present and went to bed. I hope no one will notice the stinginess and neatness of my movements. You can see that in sick and elderly people who do everything slowly and carefully, so as not to provoke pain in the lower back or elsewhere. That's something that should be obvious. Good thing Delphine gave me a set of potions for the rehabilitation period. After cleaning myself with magic, because I was too lazy to bandage myself after the shower, I took the potions as recommended and fell into healthy dreamless sleep. 419, Chapter 419. It seemed as if I had just blinked, and it was already morning. The fact that I simply cannot exercise, run, or do any other physical workout has become incredibly disgusting, completely unbearable, horrible to me, and that using magic in large quantities provokes severe nerve pain throughout my entire body. It's a disgusting feeling when a habit I've been doing for years becomes impossible to perform. It's like some itch that can't be quelled. Up until breakfast in the Great Hall, which you didn't have to attend during the holidays, I was disturbed by a nagging feeling of wrongness, somewhere on the edge of consciousness, because of a missed workout. However, as soon as I crossed glances with the nearly full complement of Slytherins, the mood rose slightly uphill. They turned pale, rubbed their cutlery, and did everything they could to avoid looking at me. Although, some of them sometimes looked. Girls mostly. Malfoy, on the other hand, could hardly keep his face. In general, breakfast brought me a good mood not only with delicious food, but also with a wild mixture of emotions and actions from the few informed ones who were aware of the fight with Voldemort. However, Potter also looked at me with a completely shocked look, and the scar on his forehead for once began to heal slowly, and it immediately caught my eye. As I indifferently ate something meaty and then dessert, I thought about the remaining Horcruxes. Would it make sense to hunt for them or direct someone? I think I should tell Dumbledore or someone about them. However, judging by Potter's scar, they've gone completely into some sort of passive phase where they can't do anything. It's even possible that in the absence of a major soul in this world, they might vanish altogether, and that would require diagnosing the guy. After all, no matter how you look at it, magic, at least part of which is based on the will and the image, and the creation of a Horcrux is such by 40%, is quite capable of ceasing to work when these conditions are violated. What meaning is put into the process of creating a Horcrux? A fragment of the soul that will be separated and sealed in a material carrier in order to allow the soul to remain in this world after death. There is no soul in the world. The conditions are violated. Goodbye, Horcrux. But the idea of a Horcrux in itself is not as bad as it seems to me, although there is some incompleteness in it. And the good thing about it is that I don't know of any way to forcibly send a soul away from the world. Well, except for my unique opportunity to work with souls through the sword. After finishing my breakfast, I noticed the absence of the headmaster and Snape. Did they go somewhere to deal with something? Quite possibly. If we assume that Potter could see our fight through his connection with Voldemort, then he probably told the headmaster about it more than once or twice. The boy had been scolded for not seeking help in such difficult matters from more competent wizards. After breakfast, I turned to Hermione at the very exit of the Great Hall. What are your plans? I'm going to the library. There's not much left of the restricted section. Me too, the girl nodded. However, I've already finished my half. Yet. I smiled, adjusting the strap of the bag on my shoulder. I have one more shelf left in the closet. And I wanted to do some calculations on the project. Maneuvering between the students scurrying back and forth, we walked to the library. You already calculated the phase inversion when you created your laser. Based on your calculations. No, the girl shook her head. It would take me 2 months to do such voluminous and comprehensive calculations. I'll create the basis of the theory and give it to you to model. Okay. Agreed. By the way, we will need to contact the mentor and decide on the articles for publication. There's no time to waste. And we really didn't waste any time plunging right into the work. Of course, I tried to keep track of the rumors floating around Hogwarts, but I didn't hear any interesting specifics. My murder of Voldemort remained information for the privileged, small circles and didn't go beyond them. This continued until the very beginning of school, and only on the first day of school, when the few students who left for the winter holidays returned, I had to adjust my plans a little. The headmaster and Snape returned. But, as it turned out, Umbridge was also missing somewhere, and when she returned for the second semester, she looked depressed, hiding it behind her favorite sugary smile. The first lesson of the new semester turned out to be Transfiguration, before which Professor McGonagall informed me that the headmaster would like to see me after class. Well, nothing surprising. Do you think, said Hermione, sitting next to me, it's because of your crusade? I'm sure it is. What do you expect from this conversation? I have no idea. I'll ask. McGonagall looked sternly in our direction, to leave conversations that are not related to the topic of today's class, Mr. Knight. Maybe you should have asked for some kind of exemption from Transfiguration classes? Master, after all. Come on, what if there's something new? After the double Transfiguration classes, it was time for herbology, where we got dirty again, dodging brazen predatory sprouts of unknown origin. Although, Neville was just happy to mess around with this, causing sincere incomprehension on the part of many classmates. Plants are not for everyone. Despite the experience gained over the years, we were in the mud up to our ears and looked at sometimes disgusting plants. We had to go to lunch and then to the charms class. It was very rare for any course in a semester to have transfiguration and charms on the same day, and even double. But it sometimes happens, mostly in the 5th and 7th years. Why? According to the students, this is done so that nothing remains of our brains before the upcoming exams. 420, Chapter 420. A/N, do you want to finish reading the book today? Do it. Now you can, winky face, may the magic be with you. Enjoy. 3. After dinner in the Great Hall, I went to the headmaster's office. There was no gargoyle in the niche, and I went up the spiral staircase to the office door without any problems, knocked, and went in. In the light of the setting sun, the headmaster's office acquired, perhaps, even more magical shades and details, and various carved bookcases, a mirror with a pensieve, the railing of the stairs to the 2nd floor. Even the big old brown globe that stood not far from the fireplace, everything acquired incredible fantasy colors. At the table sat the headmaster and McGonagall. They were going through the various documents and parchments with particular care but rather quickly. And here are the documents for collecting investments for the school, Dumbledore said quietly, handing over another folder. Looking at me over his half-moon spectacles, the headmaster straightened up in his chair. Minerva, will you leave us to talk? McGonagall shifted her gaze to me, and, receiving an affirmative nod, she gathered the documents into folders with magic with a swift movement of her hand. The folders themselves flew into the hands of McGonagall, who rose from her seat. In that case, she spoke, I'll come back tomorrow to get a better handle on the rest of the documentation. All right, the headmaster nodded, and McGonagall quickly left the office. Have a seat, Mr. Knight. The headmaster pointed to a vacated chair behind his desk. Tea, sherbet lemon. I wouldn't say no. As I walked to the chair, a tray with a service and a bowl of sherbet lemons flew up to the table. At the headmaster's will, a teapot flew off the tray, and within seconds we had each taken our first sips of fragrant tea. Of course, as always, I checked everything for various additives. Empty. Grey tea. Earl Grey. With bergamot. Yes, Mr. Knight, the headmaster smiled almost imperceptibly. I keep tea for all occasions. Well, and bergamot. I guess you've noticed by now that I love anything that even slightly resembles citrus. Absolutely, I replied with a slight smile, placing the cup on the saucer. Was there something you wanted to talk about? Yes, the headmaster repeated my actions. I've already heard about your victory. I'll even say more, I've seen it in person. Through memory, of course. The Dark Lord has indeed fallen, and there's glaring evidence of that Professor Snape has lost his mark. Not only that, I shook my head. Harry's scar started to heal for the first time ever. Yes, the headmaster nodded. When I went out to the Lodge of Necromancers, they showed me the right diagnostic spell. They have special ones. When Mr. Potter started banging into my office in the middle of the night, telling me he'd dreamt that he'd seen you fight Voldemort and win, I rushed to check his scar. The Horcrux was gone. It was as if it had never existed. I, headmaster, have information on other Horcruxes, but I'm afraid it's not relevant in the current light. I agree, the headmaster nodded, running his hand along his beard. The sun was almost over the horizon, and Dumbledore waved his hand and lit the lights in the study. I would really like to know, the headmaster continued, how exactly you achieved such a result, but I understand that such frankness will not appear just like that. I hope you're not in too much of a hurry and take some time to listen to the old man's story. Why not? However, I can't even predict your attitude toward it. Well. The headmaster took a cup from a saucer on the table and took a couple of sips of tea. I'll start with the important things so that you can understand the reasons and the point. Dark magic is divided into 3 categories. Magic, the essence and function of which is to cause irreparable harm to health, torture, and murder. Magic that requires harm, torture, and murder to create. Magic, the careless use of which, the use without looking back or despite the consequences, is capable of causing harm to the wizard himself or others around him, torture and death. We took another sip of tea. Occlumency belongs to the dark arts for a reason, and specifically to the 3rd type. In my youth, I myself, one might say, fell victim to my perfectionism and desire to learn everything as best as possible and to perform it with the greatest efficiency. Over time, of course, a lot happened, a lot had to be experienced, but one thing I learned about occlumency was that balance was needed. It's amazing, really, how such a simple thing passed my mind because balance is important in any branch of magic. When I became headmaster at Hogwarts, and even as a senior transfiguration teacher, I knew this simple truth. Do you know what the problem with occlumency is? Where is the flip side of that coin? To be honest, headmaster, I haven't given it much thought. Emotions. By keeping your mind under tight control, you keep your emotions in check. In your judgments and actions, you begin to rely only on logic and a set of external factors that have a visual embodiment. Yes, occlumency protects you from invading your consciousness, from reading your emotions, from reading your thoughts or memories, but by doing so, you deprive your emotional component of mobility, perhaps. Yes, mobility. But that's only half the problem. 421, Chapter 421. The tea in the cups ran out, and the teapot took off again from the tray, pouring its fragrant contents into our dishes. A couple of sips, and the headmaster continued his thought. The most unpleasant thing about this is that with full control, empathic sensitivity is lost. Absolutely all wizards and even ordinary people have this very sensitivity. Even the most primitive animals, except insects and others with primitive nervous systems, have empathic sensitivity. For us, intelligent and social beings, this ability is akin to vision in importance. This sensitivity allows us to understand each other much better, sometimes without words at all. Such a phenomenon as the crowd effect and many others are based on it. I understand, I nodded. That's why, in my time, I chose to use occlumency to protect my mind, even though there was information on other methods of protection. They deprived empathy completely. The headmaster just nodded, sipping his tea. This explanation of mine is an introduction to 3 topics of conversation at once, Dumbledore continued. You must have noticed the sincere and bright emotions students feel when they come to Hogwarts for the first time? This joy from the house's choice that satisfied them, from the dishes that appeared in their multitude? When you are old, you can no longer enjoy such a thing as the first time, which is why the other teachers and I always attend the first and farewell feasts in full, and in fact, the presence is by no means necessary. Let's say, strong legilimens, whether they want it or not, feel emotions and superficial thoughts much more clearly. It's like a man with very bad eyesight and a man with sharp eyesight. And so, I was faced with very unusual emotions and thoughts. I found it very interesting that you, Mr. Knight, thought very loudly about the correspondences and inconsistencies of what you saw to the movies and the books, the canon, the tale of the boy who lived. This made me involuntarily mentally tense up. You know, Mr. Knight, the headmaster smiled at his thoughts, looking somewhere in the distance. The phenomenon of reincarnation is extremely rare, and even more so in such a way that a person remembers his past. Usually, it's just scraps, small details. Having met such a phenomenon, and even with the knowledge of possible events, I was filled with hope. Hope. You know the essence of the prophecies, don't you? Absolutely, headmaster, I nodded, sipping tea and eating a jelly lemon slice. After watching Harry, the boy who, according to the prophecy, is capable of defeating Voldemort, and after watching you, Mr. Knight, I have drawn conclusions. Simple conclusions. Tom would have been reborn one way or another because I knew for sure that his soul had not left this world, although I didn't know how he could stay here. After watching Harry, I came to the disappointing conclusion that in the next 10, 15, and even 20 years, he couldn't be expected to even approach Voldemort's levels of strength and skill. He could only win by luck. You don't have to be an experienced sage to understand that. Alas, Harry didn't live up to even a fraction of expectations, the headmaster grimaced. But can one of the reasons for this be considered the conditions under which he lived? Absolutely, the headmaster leaned back in his chair, his face expressing all his sorrow. I've made a mistake. As many times before, as many times after. You know, Mr. Knight. Before joining the Order of the Phoenix, everyone who is invited is thoroughly vetted. The Dursleys. However you look at them at the time, they were a great family, friendly and loving. Lily, Dumbledore looked at me, Harry's mother. Yes, I know. Lily spoke very badly about her sister, but what do words mean against facts? Before Lily and James joined the Order, an inspection was carried out. In short, Lily herself was not a gift, and both Lily herself and her sister, Petunia, are to blame for bad relationships. But there was nothing that could negatively affect the Dursleys' attitude towards young Harry. I even asked an old friend of mine to look after them. I miscalculated twice. The headmaster took a dozen lemon slices from the vase and, leaning back in his chair again, brought one to his mouth. His right arm was clearly under an illusion, but it had lost a lot of mobility. I hadn't considered that the Dursleys would treat the boy lovelessly, and my friend. Growing up and living in post-war conditions, in ruin, hunger, cold, and death from any little thing. I hadn't considered that in her worldview for living normally, feeling well it would be enough that Harry had a roof over his head, clothes and some food. That was my mistake. I hear you, headmaster, I nodded again, holding out my hand for the remaining slices in the vase. Your gaze has turned to me. But I didn't feel a guiding hand. Would you have accepted attention and help from me? You didn't trust your own shadow, which is reasonable, in the magical world. No, I suppose not. That would be suspicious. That's what I thought. However, I was still looking for any opportunity to give you knowledge. I returned all the books to the restricted section that had ever been seized by all the headmasters. Each headmaster, Mr. Knight, has the opportunity in his position to withdraw 5 books that do not correspond to magical morality that has changed over the centuries. I was looking for any reason to send you to the restricted section. But in your first year, you showed an amazing aloofness from any events in the castle. And in the second year, you've managed it on your own, along with Miss Granger. But why? Do you really need me to state the obvious? The headmaster smiled a little, flashing his half-moon spectacles. You, as a power not of this world, are capable of ignoring prophecy. That was my bet. I understood what kind of person you are, I understood your aspirations, and I was sure that if Voldemort resurrects, then one way or another, you will not leave it just like that. You have no idea, Mr. Knight, how many times I have tried to personally confront him and win. Every time it turned out some kind of nonsense. As a result, all forces were thrown into indirect confrontation and containment of his aggression, containment of Death Eaters, keeping casualties to a minimum, depriving him of strength through people, politics, and influence. 422, Chapter 422. A/N, do you want to finish reading the book today? Do it. Now you can, Winky Face, may the magic be with you. Enjoy. 3. Since we started talking frankly, can I ask a question? Dumbledore nodded affirmatively. What was the whole situation for in the first year? In the second? The third and so on? I don't understand. In the first year. The headmaster raised one eyebrow a little in surprise. I cannot refuse my longtime mentor and friend his request. But I can't tell you its essence either. Regarding your concerns, I can say that Fluffy is not capable of harming a student. Even if the student thought he was about to be torn to pieces by a Cerberus, Fluffy would do nothing more than drool all over the poor boy from head to toe and tear his pant leg. Absolutely any magical animal located on the territory of Hogwarts is subjected to such an indestructible magical effect, the spell of the founders themselves. The whole obstacle course was traumatic but safe. I tried to combine my mentor's request, accompanied by Hogwarts' financial support, with an attempt to capture Voldemort's spirit. The Mirror of Erised is a rather tricky artifact. If it is configured correctly, it will eventually catch the soul of the one who is specified in these settings. Catch it, and destroy it like a Dementor, sending the rest away from the world. A day so much time was needed for the mirror to capture Voldemort's spirit. But I underestimated Mr. Potter's dedication, and as a result, the Dark Lord was distracted from the mirror, and the ritual failed. Then the basilisk. Absolutely safe. It was until you killed it. Even if it had received orders from Slytherin himself, petrification is its limit. What about Myrtle? It's hard to say for sure, but her body had traces of petrification, and only then she died. Death from a glance is as traceless as from Avada. What about poison? The basilisk is capable of changing the properties of its venom over a wide range. Yes, I've read in books. However, he usually uses instant lethal, or acidic. Exactly, Mr. Knight. In one of his few surviving works, Slytherin described the limiting spells deliberately used in his creation. A basilisk biting a student could leave severe scars and a powerful, painful effect, and subsequently temporary and safe paralysis and sleep. Slytherin created it as an ideal guard, able to appear anywhere in Hogwarts at any time and protect it from invasion. But a diary? How? Now that's another mistake I made. I couldn't then, and couldn't now, sense such an artifact. The Horcrux. You've noticed that it doesn't stand out in any way if you don't know where to look. It's no big deal. A girl brought a notebook with charms. Thousands of different small handicrafts and enchanted items are brought to Hogwarts every year. If signal charms sound the alarm on obviously dark artifacts, then for such no. And I'm by no means omnipresent myself, and many things only come to my attention after the fact. Indeed, thinking, I drank the tea left in the cup in one gulp. You didn't think I was doing this on purpose, did you? The headmaster was genuinely surprised. What kind of story did you have there? Very ambiguous and not talking about anything at all. Headmaster, did you know that Sirius is innocent? No, he shook his head. You know the nuances of Fidelius, right? Yes, it has been read and studied. When I suggested to James and Lily to use Sirius as a secret keeper, I was guided solely by the qualities of the young Mr. Black at that time. He would never betray and would keep the secret under any torture. It was a logical decision, the right one. The presence of the future secret keeper himself at the ritual is not necessary, his blood is enough. I never thought that they would choose Peter instead of Sirius. I thought until the very end that it was Sirius who betrayed them, which, of course, was strange but technically possible. You know, Mr. Knight, I find it absolutely impossible to save those who are their own enemy. What about the fake Moody? Many of those who know that you have known each other for a long time wondering how it was possible to overlook the fact that he is not real. And this refers to the second reason for my introduction about occlumency. Alastor is terribly paranoid. Mr. Knight, what can you say about him? I thought long and hard. I don't know Moody well enough, but he appears in a slightly new, different role every time. That's what I told the headmaster. True, I added with a chuckle, there's also constant vigilance. Dumbledore smiled back. Yes. Constant vigilance. It is so constant that he keeps his occlumency to the max, as, by the way, do you, Mr. Knight. The problem with communicating with such people is that such people are not felt empathically at all. Communicating with them is like talking to a wall. Especially when it comes to Alastor. He can be anything, and you don't know when he's real. It's a little easier with you. You have distinctive habits, movements, a set of smiles. But in empathy, you're just as empty and as if you don't exist. I'm sure you feel like you're the one who doesn't want to communicate with other students. In fact, it is they who are uncomfortable communicating with you. Do you know what they think of you? No. I'm not interested. Although right now, specifically, they're afraid of me. Not everyone, no. They admire you. They respect you. But when they try to communicate with you, kids just get lost. They just don't feel you. At least some feeling from you appears in moments of witchcraft or when you forcibly form magic around yourself, increasing its pressure. It's hard to confuse adults like this, but children. They have a strong dissonance in their head from the fact that here you are, you can be seen, you can be heard, there is a certain smell from you, but you are not felt. As I know, few have really found the desire and strength to fully communicate with you. Interesting. Yes. Alastor is absolutely the same because of his paranoia. It's still a big secret to me what is he like, the real Alastor? That's why I wasn't surprised by the slight inconsistency in Barty Crouch Jr.'s image. It was quite in Alastor's spirit. He read the material competently and as it should be, with experience and according to the scheme of the Aurors Academy. I am by no means a genius or omnipotent, though many have decided otherwise, blindly following the image they have invented for themselves. I see. I nodded, sighing. But why are you telling me all this anyway? It's just that you, Mr. Knight, have a completely neutral attitude toward me. I'm sure you'll take the information you receive adequately and will not use it in any way, nor will you release it to the masses. And then I won't care anymore. But I wanted to tell someone. 423, Chapter 423. As for occlumency. The headmaster ate another lemon slice. I didn't tell you about it before, for it was not to my advantage. I'm afraid that if you knew these nuances, you would be susceptible to emotion, would not be so determined. You wouldn't have dealt with Voldemort so quickly or left the country altogether. And our forces are limited. DMLE and Aurors are bound hand and foot by the law. Well, some are bought entirely. So you deliberately gave me all the knowledge and allowed me to use the benefits of Hogwarts so that I would eliminate Voldemort. Angry? Or upset by what I've done? Not at all. I, in a way, assumed something like that. That's good, Dumbledore nodded. As for the third subject. Heed the advice and experience of the old man, learn how to remove your occlumency. Like I said, I fell into the same trap once too. I am by no means sinless, Mr. Knight. I've done terrible things going towards my goal. But one day. Dumbledore closed his eyes, clearly sinking into not the most pleasant memories. Circumstances that I could not overcome. A ridiculous accident. My shock was so strong that occlumency was not enough. It burst like a balloon, releasing everything that I had been holding back for many years. The gravity of my sins and deeds were multiplied many times over. Dumbledore opened his eyes, looking at me more seriously and sadly at the same time than ever before. To this day, I am haunted by the ghosts of my past. This is. He raised a cursed hand. A consequence of one of them. The temptation to return everything was too strong. The temptation to hear just a few phrases. He stared at his hand for about a minute. Solving the Dark Lord problem. It took just one of the many weights off my soul. But it seems to have been enough to make me stop clinging to life. But surely it is possible to cure the curse. All it takes is more specialists, and... Save it, Mr. Knight, Dumbledore brushed it aside with a slight smile. You know, as a child, I never thought of magic. I never wanted to be a great wizard. I wanted to be a knight with a sword and a shield. Silly, isn't it? But life. It set my priorities. I didn't want to become a grand sorcerer, or chief warlock of the Wizengamot, and even more so the headmaster. But who asked me? True, I did become headmaster of my own free will. But you know, before that, I packed my bags every vacation, and until September 1st, I went somewhere, just to get away from this swamp. I fell in love with learning and teaching. This distracted me from all the bad memories and my sins. But no matter what anyone thinks, I am a simple man. Simple, old, and tired. Tired of bearing my cross. You know that death is just the beginning of a new, incredible journey, don't you? Maybe next time I'll be a knight? Or an astronaut? Or a worm of some sort? Dumbledore was obviously floating somewhere with his mind, but pulling himself together, he found a vial of potion in the table, and with trembling hand, he put it to his mouth, drinking it and leaning back in his chair. After sitting for a few minutes with his eyes closed, he spoke again. The curse. Clouding my mind. It's only thanks to Severus potions in my will that I'm still holding on. Though the latter is slipping through my fingers like sand. Mr. Knight, the headmaster looked at me. Don't make my mistakes. Sooner or later, the occlumency will come off, releasing the emotion of every memory you experience, every moment of your life, in an instant. That's why it belongs to the dark arts. Occlumency can cause irreparable harm to a wizard if not balanced. And since it wasn't too long ago that the question touched on books. The headmaster waved his hand, and from somewhere in the depths of his office, 6 old and new books flew through the air. Higher light magic, the headmaster said dryly. There are copies in the regular section, but usually, you won't find them there. My gift to you. So is this. From the table, the headmaster took out a simple playing card with an arrow on it. It will show you the way to the wizard I promised to introduce you to. I myself seem to have clearly overestimated my current capabilities and will not be able to do this personally. But he will recognize you from the card, just as you recognize him. And yet, Mr. Knight. How did you protect yourself from Tom Zavada? Thank you, I nodded, taking the books and card and putting them in a bag immediately removed from my shoulder. I took advantage of one of our developments. On the magic accumulator project. Yes, headmaster. Are you familiar with the physics of ordinary people? Yes, and quite well, Dumbledore nodded, smiling into his beard. He seemed to have finally come to his senses. Not too long ago, not more than 2 decades ago, I became very interested in fantasy and the wonders that Muggle writers make up. That's why I wanted to know more about their science, to have some idea of it, to have a foundation for my imagination. We imagined that magic was energy. Energy, in its everyday state, in a certain phase. Avada breaks through any magical barriers because it is in the opposite phase, ignoring shields and magic. And you simply inverted the magic and then used it to create a protego of sufficient power. Exactly. Unbelievable. That's another proof that I'm not a genius at all. It's all there on the surface. It seems that there was a reason that some of the guilds began to advocate the integration of the Muggle scientific approach and the existing base into the magical worldview. Oh, not for nothing. And you destroyed him in a method similar to that of the Dementors, right? As I understand it, Headmaster, Dementors digest the soul, leaving only its base. No personality, no memories, no experience, no mind. The bare core, so to speak. That's exactly what I did. And the Horcruxes, as I understood, self-destructed due to violation of working conditions. There is nothing to keep in the world, there is no connection. Yes, that's exactly how they work. That's exactly what I planned to do through the mirror. It's a pity I failed, and you had to commit a lot. It's even more a pity that my mistakes created the factors that contributed to the very appearance of the Dark Lord. Well, I won't waste any more of your time. Yes, and for Minerva, there's still a lot of different papers to prepare, introducing her to the subtleties of work and how to live on the nuts that the Ministry and Board of Governors allocate to Hogwarts, where to find the money. Are you thinking of making her your successor as headmistress of Hogwarts? Are there alternatives? The headmaster got up from his seat, and I followed his example. No. That's the point. Minerva can handle it, I'm sure. And I'll need to somehow hold out until the summer. Dying in the middle of the school year is the height of indecency, isn't it? Dumbledore even managed to smile. Indeed. They wouldn't understand. Good night, headmaster. Good night, Mr. Knight. Already at the door, I heard him mutter. I wish I could find some painkillers. 424, Chapter 424. A/N, do you want to finish reading the book today? Do it. Now you can, Winky Face, may the magic be with you. Enjoy. 3. Standing on the astronomical tower and watching nature, which had long since thrown off its winter torpor, I pondered. Almost 5 months had passed since my conversation with the headmaster. Of course, I didn't trust him more than before. I didn't feel sympathy or anything. In fact, I didn't make any attempts to remove the occlumency, though I calculated 2 methods of its removal, quick and step by step, just for the sake of interest. An amazing lull, these are the words that can describe the situation. Nothing happened at all, as if there had never been any Dark Lords. Well, at school, at least. Of course, there is a simple explanation for this. All this movement of Death Eaters never reached Hogwarts, nor did it get to the authorities, nor did it get to most of the students. For many at school, it was just rumors, information, and then quickly disappeared. Now, as the spring weather begins to turn smoothly into summer, the situation in England is coming to certain normalcy. Fudge, it turns out, resigned the day after Voldemort's visit to the ministry, and now Rufus Scrimgeour has been at the helm of magical England for almost 6 months. What does that mean for everyone? Nothing special, except that they say that his services aren't for sale, unlike Fudge. As for the rest of the Death Eaters, it's a little more complicated than that. Those of what might be called alternatively gifted individuals are caught by the DMLE and the Aurors pretty quickly. Among such losers are mostly idiots, maniacs, and murderers. Those Death Eaters who are smarter and more inventive, especially those who have not been caught or paid off in the past, go about their business safely. Most likely, they have always referred to those who joined the Dark Lord either under pressure or out of expectation of potential political and financial gain. So to hell with them. Some of the Death Eaters formed small gangs, but without good leadership, they were captured pretty quickly, interrogated, and executed by the hard and incorruptible hand of Scrimgeour. Well, if there was a set of offences, bringing under the highest measure. Not. There's a separate story there, covered by the Daily Prophet already for a month. It turns out that in magical medicine, there is no concept of mental abnormalities in principle. No, of course, there is no denying the facts of the deviations themselves, as well as various diseases, but the branch of healing magic aimed at treating such things simply does not exist. Because of the case with Nott, the Mungo gathered a council, argued for 2 weeks, and in the best magical tradition, decided to simply steal a couple of specialists from ordinary people. The idea was nipped in the bud by a certain Smethwick and addressed to the minister, saying, "The mental health of the magical part of the nation is under threat, blah, blah, blah." As a result, a small institute for the study of mental illnesses of magical and non-magical nature was organized under Mungo. It seems to me that the absence of such a concept as psychiatry in magical medicine is due to the fact that wizards know very well about the existence of the soul, various curses, and other things. Organic injuries are treated at once. The seclusion of wizards also plays a role. Not from the world around them but from themselves as well. Well, if someone went crazy in his house, didn't show up, then died quietly, it's no big deal. So it turned out that over the years, Theodore Nott became the third, damn it, patient in Mungo's tiny mental illness department. He had obvious mental abnormalities, deviant behavior, and unmotivated aggression with almost a split personality. Still, at the same time, there were no curses, no organic brain changes that could lead to this, no soul damage. This has already been told by students from Hufflepuff who have access to Mungo. Word of mouth. 425, Chapter 425. In general, Nott served society. But this is not the end of the story. Nott Sr. realized that his son was at risk of becoming a guinea pig and quickly stole him. He teamed up with Selwyn, who was released from prison, trying to somehow restore his family's mansion, and they went to take revenge with such a simple company. Well, it's understandable. But to take revenge on me personally is a problem. It was clear without a clue that they wouldn't make it. So they decided to hit the people important to me. I found out about it as follows. End of February. Hermione and I walked through the corridors of the castle. A couple of minutes ago, we finished all imaginable and unimaginable calculations on the magic accumulator and exchanged the studied data on the restricted section. In general, the mood is upbeat. Malfoy and his company come around the corner. Quite a small company. Just Crabbe and Goyle. At the sight of me, they turned pale as one, but to my surprise, they didn't try to turn aside, as they usually did. Draco took an open letter out of his robe pocket and silently handed it to me. Of course, before I took it in my hands, I magically checked it for surprises. It was clean. Part of the letter was erased by magic, and in response to my questioning look directed at Draco, he swallowed and answered briefly, "Personal." Well, all right. The rest of the letter, clearly written by Narcissa, talked about the ridiculous attack of Nott with his son, Selwyn, and 5 mercenaries. In order not to worry Draco, Narcissa immediately mentioned that she had been in the company of his dearest aunt lately. Although the name is not specified, but there can be no doubt who this aunt is. Anyway, this auntie had gone so wild that only Nott Jr. and Selwyn Jr. were able to leave the scene of the altercation alive and almost unharmed. This provoked my displeasure, and for a week, I thought of where and how to find them to express it in a deadly rude manner, but I didn't have to do so. A week after reading the letter, in early March, another letter arrived. It was very formal and on paper, not parchment. The letter came from MACUSA, which surprised and alarmed me. What surprised me even more was that it was addressed to Maximilian Alexander Black Knight, which was rather suspicious. Its content was simple and disturbing. It turned out that Nott and Selwyn had somehow obtained information about where John and Sarah had moved to, and had decided to attack them to exact revenge on me. But, as it turns out, the Knights had gone through the magical authorities when they moved to the States and were registered there as my non-magical guardians. It turns out that Macusa has a very good information gathering process in other countries, and they found out that I was the only possible potential or already the actual head of the House of Black, which is already an influence. Also, the Americans, as it turned out, are not indifferent to various rumors. They took the fact of Voldemort's rebirth as a given in my interference in his activities at the tournament. And so, there was organized magical surveillance of the knights. Given the stricter control of magical law and order in the states, Nott and Selwyn, who'd arrived illegally, were immediately under the radar, and as soon as they pointed their wand at the Night Home, the Aurors of the states caught them in the act. So, that was the end. Why the end? By the time they got to Knights, those idiots had exposed the statute several times, killed a few people, and used the unforgivable a few times. In magical America, that's the death penalty. That's it. Other than that, everything was as usual. The information about the revival of several houses, about the beginning of their financial activity and other things, was indeed confirmed, but again through the school children now and then someone told how the activities of the businesses and firms frozen in the year 81 were renewed. Neville enthusiastically told that the magical botanic garden had started functioning again, and several farms for growing important plants for various branches of industry. All of this began after Voldemort's death. It seems to me that my official appearance in the Wizengamot led others to believe that the ministry could be sent into the Dark Forest on this matter, and they decided to enter the Hall of Heritage secretly, which was accomplished during the operation to lure Potter into the ministry. They got access to the official resources and wanted to use them for the good cause of blood purity, but then Voldemort passed away, and they couldn't let that go to waste. So they launched everything that was available, resumed financing, and so on. Well, that's how I see it. Who knows how really? There has also been some progress in studies, by the way. After writing to Lady Greengrass a few times, Hermione and I have chosen appropriate topics for scientific publications. Hermione was relatively lucky, because our project with Flitwick requires several types of previously unused transfiguration. We got 4 topics on healing magic, 4 on chimerology, and a lot of literature to keep us on our toes. In healing magic, by the way, the practical classes on treatment had been put aside, and now there was only diagnostics. It was a lot simpler here, and some subspecies of magical mice, rats, and rabbits were used. It didn't matter who was on the surgical table. Only the nuances in the magical response to diagnostic spells and the ability to read the very 3-dimensional charts Delphine had once shown me were important. And practice in chimerology is postponed for an unknown period of time, for this science is devilishly unprofitable for the wallet, and it would be better for everyone to go on a chimerological journey through magically hidden domains and other natural space folds, to search, hunt and sort out various nuances. 426, Chapter 426. There are 5 chapters left. The last chapter will be on December 31st. May the magic be with you. Enjoy. 3. Having warmed up in the almost summer sun, I sat down on the edge of the astronomy tower and, dangling my legs, began to wave them like a child. There you are, Hermione's voice rang out behind me, but it was no surprise to me, for in magic, I could feel her coming. Professor Flitwick asked me to find you. It's time to get down to the first practical creation of the magic accumulator. Hermione stood beside me practically at the very edge of the tower and straightened a strand of hair that had escaped because of the wind. Great. I stood up briskly from the edge and followed the girl who had immediately turned around. We reached the professor's laboratory in a few minutes, as secret as possible at Hogwarts. Flitwick was already there and preparing various materials, ranging from wood to crystals, actively and amusingly running from one table to another. Ah, Mr. Knight! Smiled the professor immediately, as soon as I got closer. Great, just great. I've checked all your and Miss Granger's calculations, checked against mine, and made some small and quite unnecessary corrections. Here. Flitwick waved his hand toward the table, from which a folder of papers immediately flew off and slid into my hands. It wasn't very thick, about 30 pages. Read it, please. Having said that, Flitwick went back to his business of arranging the various materials in the places he alone knew. On the other hand, I sat down with Hermione at the table, and we quickly leafed through, memorized, and understood the gist of the minor changes, which were mostly about materials, and there were a couple of nuances about transfiguration. A dozen minutes later, the 3 of us were already standing at a special large table with a lot of rune complexes engraved on it. At the wizard's will, these complexes could move around the table, changing in size and structure pretty handy, and no need to engrave something new all the time. So, Flitwick rubbed his hands together with a smile as he stood on a special stool. As you and I realized, heterogeneous materials don't really work for us because of the heterogeneity itself. Flitwick pointed with his hand at various organic materials, bars of wood of various sorts, bones, some other incomprehensible stuff. We'll experiment with them, however, but afterwards. For now, we'll deal with crystals with different crystal lattices. Unfortunately, my current magical abilities don't allow me to work with the matter at the atomic level. Yes, yes, don't be surprised, I'm very well up on my knowledge in the usual scientific disciplines. Hermione and I smiled at the professor. So, he continued, straightening up. We can, of course, use transfiguration and transmutation to set the structure we want, but we can't selectively influence not only the atoms but even the cells of the crystal lattice. The smallest thing that a wizard can affect with the known-to-me data is not much less than a millimeter. Therefore, we can't completely go into miniaturization. But... Flitwick raised his index finger up. We can get crystal slices of the shape we want. The excess is cut off by Miss Granger's calculated transformation spell related to the Transfiguration School. We end up with the materials we need. Calculated mostly by Max, Hermione said. Yes, even so, Flitwick shrugged. Let's get on with it, then. Let's start with quartz, as the easiest one for us to work with. Flitwick moved the transparent crystal on the table, placing it in front of us. The project is mostly yours, so you have the honor of making the first working sample as well. From start to finish. Okay, Professor, we nodded simultaneously. Then I, looking at Hermione, took another quartz crystal, we'll make the mechanism on the phase inversion. Okay, and I'll take care of the accumulation module directly. After quickly figuring out how the table worked, we each made our own magic circles under the crystals. Taking out our wands, we began to smoothly and carefully conjure, dividing the crystals into pieces, changing their shape, making a kind of pancakes. The next step was to enchant objects directly. It took about an hour and a half. Calculations are calculations, but something can always go wrong in the process. Thanks, old man, everything went smoothly here. After an hour and a half of work, we had about a dozen transparent pancake crystals at our disposal. For peer-to-peer storage, which in our view is storage with one pancake of extended two-dimensional space, it was decided to use the following scheme: a sort of pie, the first layer of which was a block for magic absorption, then the storage body itself, and after that a block for magic output. For a later, more elaborate product with several storage bodies, the inlet and outlet would be in the same pancake. The bodies themselves would be delimited by bidirectional limiters linked to each other. With their help, the bodies will accumulate magic sequentially and discharge in reverse order. After enchanting, we proceeded to assembly. To do this, we placed the appropriate pancakes one on top of the other, and formed a small ritual scheme on the table below them. As soon as we activated it, the runes and lines glowed with soft blue light, and with them, our small construction, the size of 3 coins on top of each other, also glowed faintly. A couple of seconds and everything is ready. Let's hurry up and check it out. Flitwick, beaming with enthusiasm, immediately picked up the resulting magic accumulator carefully and carried it on his outstretched arms, like a most precious relic, to another table. We followed him. Climbing onto another stool, the professor carefully placed the magic accumulator in the center of the ritual diagram engraved on the table, looked at me, at Hermione, and sighed deeply. Well. Merlin, help us. 427, Chapter 427. Flitwick touched a pair of runes in the circuit with his wand, and it glowed blue. The professor didn't remove his wand because it needed a flow of magic to test it. So. The professor whispered quietly, covering his eyes. Magic absorption works. I could feel it clearly, too. There are small leaks in the circuit, but through them, you can understand if the accumulator is absorbing magic and how much of what is being fed to it. All of it, by the feel of it. Absorption. In full, the professor voiced my thoughts. Speed. Flitwick was clearly thinking, calculating something in his mind. Above average. Yes. Slightly above average. Let's fill it to the brim. Flitwick stood motionless in front of the working scheme of the ritual for about 30 minutes. His stamina is exemplary. Not everyone is capable of standing still for so long, especially being mentally focused on a rather complex and abstract task. But nothing lasts forever, and neither did Flitwick. With a deep breath and an exhale, the professor withdrew his wand from the ritual circuit, and it went out. Except that the accumulator of 3 transparent quartz pancakes continued to glow faintly and even shimmer like the glare on the water. Not bad at all, the professor proclaimed in a slightly tired voice and nodded to himself. It's just great. Everything works just fine. We've got enough magic for a dozen very decent Patronuses in the pulse modification. Flitwick whirled happily around the table, looking nothing like the wise old charms master. But, he quickly pulled himself together and stood beside us, looking at the accumulator. Let's leave it for a week and see if it discharges and how much. You have no doubt it will. Absolutely, Miss Granger, absolutely. The magical functioning of an object is somehow tied to the presence of magic in or around it. We have the cost calculations, and they clearly show that the costs exceed the average magical background for England. But at Hogwarts, the background is higher. But we'll put it in an environment without magic, and we can watch for leaks if there are any in the period of a full discharge. But anyhow, my dears, it's an unequivocal success. We spent the next half hour discussing the already much negotiated nuances of development rights and whatnot. Flitwick didn't want anything out of it at all, well, except 10% of the profits from the product's sale, if there ever was any. Although the professor is an idealist who sees beauty, if not in everything, then in many things, but he is also well aware that wizards, and people in general, are rather aggressive creatures, and such a development, as a magic accumulator, can serve both good and bad purposes. But that's the way it is with every development, first for the military, then for civilians. Hasn't it occurred to you, Mr. Knight, to close off access to the development entirely, so as to increase the influence of you and your family, along with the power? He asked as we drank tea and discussed various nuances in the professor's office. No, I shook my head. You yourself understand that it's just me and my aunt's portrait. And I don't intend to influence the world. I prefer personal power in order to translate into reality the phrase, whoever comes to us with a sword is easier to shoot. I'm going to travel, explore the world, fight off dissatisfied with master's degrees and other achievements. And look for yourself. What's the point of keeping everything to yourself? The professor and Hermione looked at me curiously. In the Middle Ages, various developments and innovations appeared as if from a cornucopia. Wizards developed the concept of intellectual property and patent much earlier than ordinary people. 5 or 10 years of exclusive rights to use or manufacture, and then the novelty went to the market or mass production at a small percentage of deductions. And after the statute? Everyone is taking everything for themselves. Developments remain in families under strict secrecy, become a family asset. As a result, they wander from the defeated to the winner, remaining no less secret. And what's the point? We have pronounced stagnation. Only recently has a movement begun in the direction of a scientific approach to magic and the beginning of collective research activities to bring research to the public and for use. I see. Nodded Flitwick. There. I'm sure many brilliant minds have faced the problem of a trivial lack of magic in their practical research. Needless to say, look at Mr. Arthur Weasley. He's an undeniable genius at enchantment. He has enchanted his car far better than the night bus, but he is not a strong wizard because of his psychology. I bet if he had an abundance of magic, we could see far more interesting enchantments in his performance. The same goes for everyone else. All the brilliant, varied, versatile, and large-scale research into magic has been done by powerful wizards. But what obstacles do you think they have met? You tell me, Mr. Knight. Or you, Miss Granger. Hermione straightened up a little and looked at me. You go ahead, I nodded. Well, if you consider serious work and research and not petty nonsense like a self-soaping rag, which, for some reason, has to be yellow. Flitwick literally grunted, suppressing a chuckle, and Hermione continued her thought. Then it should be noted they are all extremely magic-intensive. And they're all completely dark. Dark down to the last rune. The lack of magic for grandiose and large-scale experiments forced wizards to go to extreme measures. A prime example is Echrisdes. His writings and research are fundamental in many ways, though some are distinctly incomplete. It seems to me that his need for a lot of magic led him to dark rituals and sacrifices. Perhaps towards the end of his life, because of dark magic, Echrisdes went a little mad. Completely mad. That's why his last writings reek of madness. There's also Flamel, I nodded. I don't think the Philosopher's Stone is a light product. And there are plenty of such examples. As a result, one went mad and died alone in his fortress on the island, the other most of his life running from annoying envious people. In general, as I understood from some historical sources, the same guilds were created not so much as communities of wizards on interests, defending each other's rights and helping each other in different ways, but also for collective rituals and magical manipulations. But they, too, have gone to the same extreme as ordinary wizard families, saying, we have calculated, we have conjured, it's ours, we won't let anyone else have it. It's a good thing things are slowly improving, or we'll soon be stuck in this stagnation. You know, Mr. Knight, I'm glad we've come to an understanding on this matter, the little professor said as he sat back in his chair. I was going to suggest doing things the old-fashioned way myself, with exclusive rights for 5 years and patents. I was afraid I'd have to convince you of that, even though I'm the scientific director of the project. Now that we've come to a common denominator, I dare to take care of the paperwork and other bureaucratic nuances while you, Mr. Knight, Miss Granger are free to prepare for your examinations. As for the rights to all the unique developments involved in the project, we've already negotiated, and they're yours. After such a momentous occasion, we didn't do anything. We just went off to gather material for future articles, to get our knowledge established, to storm the usual section of the library to pick up material for exams, and to catch up on knowledge for the 6th and 7th years. 428, Chapter 428. In the middle of May, Professor Flitwick pleased us with the completed registration documents for the magic accumulators, exclusive rights to use them for himself, me, and Hermione for a period of 5 years. All sorts of legal trivia and so on. I read this and was completely satisfied with the work done. There could be a great future for accumulators. At least the number of victims for rituals would be reduced. And it is worth creating a super-duper accumulator to try and absorb it with my sword. The result might be interesting. In addition to the usual educational activities, I started developing spells for healing magic. Although, such a statement of the question will not be entirely correct. In healing magic in particular, and in magic in general, there is a serious fundamental problem: the inverse relation of the cost of magic to the quality of the calculations and modeling of the construct or scheme of magical influence. The lack or inaccuracy of these models is compensated by imagination and abstract images of what a wizard wants to get. Of course, with experience and age, the wizard hardens his mind and will, becoming able to make magic denser, compensating for his inability to use large amounts of magic for a spell and increasing its power. That's why old practicing wizards are stronger than newcomers. But that's not the root of the evil. To calculate the scheme requires an understanding of the process that the wizard wants to translate into reality. But even careful work on this aspect leaves at least 20% to the imagination. But if a lot of things in the world can be comprehended in the same way that ordinary people started with, by observing, comparing, fitting phenomena and processes to certain standards expressed in numbers, runes, and so on, then wizards have trouble observing the microcosm. This trouble results in a catastrophic shortage of spells, the work of which is focused on the processes taking place in this microcosm, for example, healing magic. Of course, a strong wizard can cure damage with a wave of his wand, but that requires a huge expenditure of magic and is beyond the reach of very, very many people. The arrival of magic accumulators on the market will partially solve this problem, but only partially. The very root of the problem is that wizards have no idea about many processes going on in the body of a living being, about the mechanisms of cells, organelles, and many other things. As a result, it turns out that a wizard can cure magical injuries, curses, and all sorts of unknown magical crap, but a broken finger is all ready to the potion makers. Over many centuries of trial and error, these desperate guys were able to formulate a concept, idea, and recommendations for creating such potions, from the effect of which other fans of stupid wand swings can only gnaw their elbows with envy. This is a problem I decided to partially correct, or rather, to try to correct. To do that, I bought a couple of potions from the pharmacy and got them delivered by Owl Delivery. I make them so mediocre myself, and Snape's grades fluctuate in a very wide range. I don't know the reason, but that's not the point. I spent the next 2 days stupidly drinking potions and trying, along with Rowena, to analyze the mechanism of the magical effects occurring in the body. It's hard to explain the idea. As some say, the potion is a spell in a bottle. I went from the opposite. The spell is the outline of the magical effect that flew out of the potion bottle. I concentrated on Skelgro and Wiggenweld potion. It is banality in its essence, and there are analogues among spells to them. But these analogues are extremely costly, and magical exhaustion is by no means a myth but a consequence of overloading the nervous system from the strong tension needed to produce a large amount of magic or to increase its density. For me, it is not so terrible, for my wear resistance is quite high, but as a scientific material and development it is more than necessary. Anyway, I managed to create the right magical circuit for 2 spells on the second day. But it made sense to me and to those rare wizards who have very high magical sensitivity. And so, the next stage of decompilation began: the arithmetic justification of the process of forming the magical contour. It took 24 hours. Another 24 hours were spent comparing the arithmetic formulas with the knowledge of microbiology and other medical disciplines. The result: 2 working spells that allow you to mend bones and heal soft tissue injuries in less than an hour and have high energy efficiency, ready material for the 2 mandatory scientific papers on healing magic to gain mastery in it, a severe migraine and 2 days rest in the hospital wing because of overwork. Worked all this time at full stretch, with the full mental strengthening with hemomancy and with the use of Rowena's capabilities. I fell ill, in short. 429, Chapter 429. You have no idea. In the hospital wing next to my bed sat Hermione in her school uniform. No idea. Exactly, she nodded with a serious face and immediately fixed a loose strand of hair. How I wish I could tell you my opinion on the extent of your carelessness. So tell me, I smiled and moved to the headboard of my bed, leaning against the pillow. I'll never be able to get used to a pajama suit, which is considered almost an obligatory element of the wardrobe in England. And in other countries. I'm just used to sleeping in my underwear, that's all. Surely I must look funny in the striped suit they gave me. It's extremely irresponsible to get sick just before exams. Except for rare exceptions, we studied the school curriculum on a PAR with the rest. This means that it takes time for careful preparation. The degree of importance of the final grades on the O.W.L.S. and NEW.T.S. cannot be exaggerated. All options for further actions in life related to these grades are very tightly tied to them. The commissions are incorruptible and under a bunch of contracts and obligations. Wherever grades are important, it is impossible to go through connections or in any other way. You can be 3 times as powerful, you can be Merlin in the flesh, but with bad grades, like I said, some options won't be available. That's not what's bothering you, is it? Hermione sighed and sat down more relaxed, looking at my obviously impudent, smiling face. You're right. I'm just wildly pissed off, yet. But there's almost no emotion on her face. Just unbelievable. No, did you see that? Since you are so smart, it seems to us in the ministry that you can pass the O.W.L.S. and NEW.T.S. at the same time. That's what the lady from the ministry said this morning, May 30th, when she showed up at the hospital wing. Her appearance was decent, but her manner of presenting the material was even more unpleasant than that of Umbridge. The lady handed over permission to take both exams, but at the same time, the ministry really put forward a requirement for passing at the same time the OWLS and NEWTS. Because the commission is too busy to convene it out of turn specifically for the 2 of you, I'm sorry. I wonder whose shoe did I shit in? Come on, I smiled as calmly as possible. We know all the material perfectly well and will cope with any task. You're right. But that doesn't take away from the fact that I resent it, Hermione frowned. So we'll just read the books, then. With our experience in witchcraft, it won't be a problem for us to create a spell the first time and completely successfully. Although, when Madame Pomfrey lets me go, we'll run through the 6th and 7th year program a dozen times. In fact, that's what we did, and a week later, it was time for exams. To be honest, given the amount of noise and panic surrounding these exams, I expected more from them. However, in fact, they were just quality exams. At each of them, we were gathered in a large hall, seated at a separate small table, and given specially enchanted parchments with tasks, quills, and parchments for writing answers. They were so enchanted that they made magic itchy, if you can even call it that. Of course, neither Hermione nor I were surprised by twice as many different questions. We were taking 2 exams, and they had the same format. After the theory, there was practice, and it was quite simple. It's just that in front of a commission of 5 old, I would even say, ancient wizards, you demonstrate spells from the ticket drawn for luck. Well, or you brewing a potion, but here you are no longer alone, but with several more students. Herbology demonstrates skills. At the same time, which is funny, a separate point is given for not getting covered in mud from head to toe. In general, everything is highly specialized. The 2 weeks of exams created such tension among the students that it seemed as if even the air was creaking from it. But as soon as the last exam was over, the 5th and 7th year students calmed down, being everywhere in a state of blissful euphoria. On the other hand, the little ones were running and fussing around, looking at us with incomprehension. And then there was the end of term feast, the year's results. 430, Chapter 430. The day of departure was sunny. The summer sun was warming, and I was enjoying its rays, standing in my school uniform, but without a robe, on the astronomy tower. Strange sensations were assaulting my mind, and I'm willing to bet that you could easily read sadness in my gaze right now. It was with this look that I looked around the surroundings of the castle, its towers, windows, almost every stone in the walls, or the patterns of lattice windows. Enjoying the view, Mr. Knight? At my side stood the headmaster in his mauve robe and hat, his grey beard swaying in time with the wind. Yes. I think I'm trying to remember. I'm sad and happy at the same time that I graduated from school, and this stage of my life has come to an end. It's a great place, I must say, smiled the headmaster. Did you know that from here, if you look closely, you can see the very edge of the Centaur watch post? No, headmaster. I wasn't paying attention. Over there, Dumbledore pointed a finger toward the Forbidden Forest. After looking more closely and strengthening my vision, I really noticed on the hill among the slightly dark needles of trees a very well camouflaged something. Obviously man-made. Indeed. We were silent for a while, peering into the Forbidden Forest. It's amazing to me, the headmaster continued, that as I peer into the forest, I discover something new every time. You haven't followed my advice yet, have you? Suddenly changing the subject, Dumbledore looked at me. No. Decided to wait. What? Ah. I see. I can't blame you for not trusting me. In fact, I must commend you. You have to be on your guard with the powers that be. Guys like me are a lot on their minds, even if they look like funny, crazy old men. I know, headmaster. We stood in silence for a few more minutes. Why did you announce at the feast that Voldemort was finally dead? Why not? The headmaster shrugged. Everyone already knows that. As well as who helped him find peace. Rumors are like that. I've noticed. But it's worth giving credit, the headmaster smiled even wider. Thanks to an unwarranted, to some extent, fear of you, many students from Slytherin have learned cleaning spells to a non-verbal level, and some even to a wandless level. A smirk crept onto my face on its own. Also, headmaster, you shocked me with your announcement that you were stepping down as headmaster. Was there a choice? A day or two, and the statement wouldn't be needed anymore. Right. Do you think if Beans had been headmaster, he would have been removed from office because of his ghostly nature? Ah, good question. Dumbledore pretended to think, stroking his beard. I think it's unlikely. More precisely, they would have taken him off, but where to put him? There would be 2 headmasters. Have you considered to live some more? You must have studied the way I healed from the Lupin bite. Of course, I studied it. Indeed, getting into the Chamber of Secrets without being proficient in Parseltongue was rather problematic. Did you pack your tent, by the way? Of course. So, I've studied it. But you know, this is not my case. Even if I suddenly changed my mind about dying, such a ritual would not help me in any way. The curse also affects the soul. By the way, since such a conversation came up, the headmaster took out his wand and held it out to me. I believe this belongs to you. An interesting thing. Of course, before I took one of the Deathly Hallows in my hands, I checked it for any magic or traps, causing the headmaster to look disapprovingly. It's just. To curse or set a trap on a wand is such a wild mauvaise ton that it's better to shoot yourself. To resurrect and shoot yourself again. I can't help myself, I shrugged, smiling guiltily. After all, green colors would suit you, Mr. Knight. Taking this strange wand with several bumps, I listened to the sensations and launched Avis into the sky. A flock of white pigeons literally flew off the wand. There were a lot of them flapping and cooing vigorously, spreading their feathers, and eventually flying away. A very well done spell. Thank you, headmaster. Your praise is not an empty word. I perfectly felt of exactly how this wand worked, for I had experienced something similar on more than one occasion. Do you know how it works? With a question, I looked at the smiling headmaster, who folded his hands in front of him. Do you understand? He was really surprised. Well, of course, I know. I mean, like I said, I was into science fiction in my day, and with it, conventional science. An ordinary resonator to increase the volume of magic at the output. Exactly that, nodded the headmaster, allows its owner to go beyond the limits of possibilities that are outlined to man by his nature. I don't need it. Do you mind if I destroy this Deathly Hallow? Do as your mind tells you. But I will tell you that this wand has served me well in growing my personal power. Throwing the wand in the air, I waved my hand, immediately summoning the sword, and sliced it in 2 on the fly, immediately commanding the sword to disappear. Of course, when cutting, the command to absorb was given. The resonator built into my soul wouldn't hurt me. It's a bit of a pity even. Dumbledore looked after the halves of the wand falling down. Well, it's for the best. Too much trouble from it. What are your plans? Plans? I looked up into the clear blue sky. Well, I'm not going to have a rest. I need to gain mastery in other disciplines, travel, discover new and incredible things. Maybe Egypt? Something new is coming up there. Or the USA. Since I don't have to go to Hogwarts now, I think adventures won't keep me waiting. And my mentor will keep me straight. Yeah, perky girl. Ahem, a girl. Dumbledore looked at me very carefully and shook his head. You should definitely sort out your occlumency. Maybe you'll have an epiphany. We stood for a bit longer and then turned around and walked out of the tower simultaneously. I had all my things with me, so I didn't need to go anywhere else. Already at the very bottom, at the exit from the castle, at the gates of which there was only one carriage without a roof, from which Hermione looked at me impatiently, the headmaster and I stopped. You know, headmaster, I don't know how to say goodbye, especially knowing that. Don't worry, Mr. Knight, Dumbledore smiled very kindly. You are not the only one who suffers from that defect. Farewell, perhaps. Indeed. You don't. We nodded at each other with a smile, and I headed for the carriage. Well, a friend of my harsh days, what are your plans? I'm going to visit my parents in France for a week or 2. And then back. I must continue my studies. I hope Lady Greengrass will still be comfortable with my presence as an assistant. I see. Let me know before you return. I'll put you up at my house. Max. What? I smiled. The house is big, 4 floors, huge library, 3 meals a day, change of linen. What? I can't host a friend. Tricky. Very tricky. Okay. Deal, Hermione smiled and nodded. What were you talking to the headmaster about? Saying goodbye, Hermione, I leaned back in my seat. We were saying goodbye. You make it sound like he's about to die. Covering my eyes, I thought aloud. He really is dying. How? I mean. He hasn't even said anything. Like this. A couple of days left. You know, Miona. He doesn't even have a house. That's weird. He's done so much in his life and in his positions. There were so many dangers at school, so many things. Sometimes you think and there is not enough anger at him. But the most amazing thing here is that in the end, he achieved his goals, no matter what. And now that he's dying, I feel like I've said goodbye to the greatest man I've ever known. Something dripped on my face. It's a terrible day for Rain. So the book has come to an end. Thank you for reading it, and also a special thank you to everyone who supported me on P.T.R.N. Happy New Year!